Welcome, everybody. As night settles in, let's dive into the pages of time, unfolding another story from the past. Maybe you're already laying in bed, or simply letting history keep you company. Where are you listening from tonight? Leave a comment if you like. I always enjoy hearing about your corner of the world. And if these gentle tales of lives long ago bring you comfort and rest, I'd be honored to have you stay with me by subscribing this channel. Get yourself comfortable. Here's the story. The Raven Cycle, the great thief of light. The world, in its first days, was a place of soft edges and perpetual twilight. No brilliant sun blazed in the heavens. No silver moon cast a luminous glow upon the land. No sharp, diamond-point stars pricked the velvet cloak of the night. There existed only a single, vast, and undifferentiated realm, a place where the sky and the earth met in a seamless, mournful embrace. A thick gray mist clung to everything, a damped shroud that muffled sound and obscured vision. The light which permeated this world was a feeble, sourceless thing, a universal grayness that allowed the eyes to see but robbed the heart of hope. It was a world without shadow, without contrast, without the vibrant certainty of day or the profound mystery of night. Within this monochrome existence, the people of the first days lived their lives. They were the Tlingit, the Haida, the Tsimshian, and their kin. Their spirits us muted as the world they inhabited. Their longhouses, built from great red cedars, stood like dark ghosts along the rugged coastline, their forms blurred by the ever-present mist. The air carried the constant scent of wet stone, damp earth, and the salty breath of the sea. Their voices, when they spoke, were hushed, their laughter a rare and fleeting sound, comparable to the sudden call of a loon before it is swallowed by the silence. They fished in the dim waters, their canoes gliding like silent water skaters over the surface, and they gathered berries and roots from the forest floor, a world painted in shades of charcoal and slate. Their existence was one of quiet sorrow. They knew of a greater light only through the stories whispered by the elders, tales passed down from a time when the old ones, the great spirits, had withdrawn the sun, the moon, and the stars, hoarding them for reasons beyond mortal comprehension. These celestial bodies were not mere lights. They were living entities, sources of warmth, wisdom, and dreams. Without them, the world was incomplete. A song missing its melody, a feast lacking its flavor. The people felt this absence in their bones, a deep, chronic longing that colored their every thought and action. In this world of gray, a being of singular character and potential was born. It happened in the high branches of an ancient Sitka spruce, a tree so grand its top was often lost in the low-hanging clouds. A nest, a messy, robust construction of twigs, moss, and shed deer fur, cradled a clutch of eggs. One of these eggs, slightly larger than the others, possessed a shell that held a strange, oily sheen. When the time came, the shell did not simply crack, it split with a decisive pop, and from it tumbled a creature that was all beak, feet, and insatiable curiosity. This was the raven, though he was not yet the great thief of legend. He was merely Yale, a fledgling whose feathers were the color of the mist itself, a sooty, unremarkable gray. But his eyes, even then, held a startling intelligence. They were black, shiny beads that missed nothing, reflecting the dull world with a spark of something else entirely, a restless, probing cleverness. While his siblings squawked mindlessly for food, he would tilt his head, observing the way the water droplets clung to a hemlock needle, or the intricate pattern of a spider's web strung between two branches. His first flight was not a graceful soar, but a frantic, tumbling affair that ended with him lodged in a thicket of salmonberry bushes. Yet, instead of crying out in frustration, He used his strong, sharp beak to pluck a berry, tasting the sudden, shocking burst of color on his tongue, a flavor that was the very essence of the red he could not see. He was different. The gray world was a puzzle to him, a locked box he felt an irresistible compulsion to open. He heard the elders of the human village below his tree speaking in hushed, reverent tones of the stolen lights, of the great spirit who kept them hidden in a lodge far away. And an idea, faint at first, began to glow within his clever, mischievous heart. It was an idea that would one day set the world ablaze with light. The Whispering Woods. The forest where Yale learned the ways of the world was a cathedral of living wood and whispering green. Giant cedars stood as pillars, their bark fibrous and thick, smelling of rich, dry earth and resilience. Hemlock and spruce crowded together, their branches creating a canopy so dense that the perpetual gray light of the outside world was filtered into a dim, aquatic gloom on the forest floor. Here, the air was cool and carried the scent of decay and new growth. The loamy fragrance of rotting nurse logs, the sharp perfume of sword ferns, and the delicate aroma of fungi that bloomed like strange, pale flowers in the shadows. Yale, now a juvenile raven with feathers that were beginning to show a deeper, more glossy black, moved through this realm like a shadow given purpose. He did not merely fly from tree to tree, he investigated. He would land on a moss-covered log, his claws making soft thuds against the spongy surface, and cock his head, listening. The forest was not silent. It spoke in a language of drips and creaks, of rustles and distant calls. He learned to distinguish the scuttling of a beetle under the bark from the heavier, more deliberate footsteps of a marten on the hunt. His survival depended on a mind that worked faster than his wings. He discovered that by mimicking the distress call of a squirrel, he could startle the creature into dropping a nut, which he would then swiftly snatch. He learned that the glossy, blue-black crowberries clustered in certain clearings provided the most sustenance, while the brighter red ones often left a bitter, unpleasant taste. He observed the salmon, their bodies thick and silver, fighting their way upstream, and the great brown bears that waited to catch them with a casual, powerful swipe of a paw. He understood, in a primal way, the balance of this gray world, the give and take, the hunt and the harvest. But his most significant education came from the other inhabitants of the woods, those who possessed wisdom older than the trees. One afternoon, while probing a rotten stump for grubs, he heard a dry, rasping voice. "You are a noisy one. Your thoughts are like pebbles being shaken in a dried gourd." Yale hopped back, startled. There, coiled in a patch of weak light, was a creature long and sinuous, its scales patterned with geometries of umber and black. It was Sinti, the great horned serpent, a being of ancient knowledge whose eyes held the patience of stone and the sharpness of obsidian. "My thoughts are my own," Yale retorted, his own voice a rough croak. "Are they?" Sinti mused, its forked tongue tasting the air. "They spill out from you." You look at a stream and wonder where it begins. You look at a mountain and wonder what lies on the other side. You hear the humans speak of the lost lights, and you wonder if you could find them. Yale felt a thrill, a mixture of fear and excitement course through him. The serpent had seen into the heart of him. "This gray is boring," he said, the simplest word for a feeling that was immensely complex. "It is a blanket that smothers everything. I hear the sadness in the human songs. I feel it in the way the wind sighs through the branches." Sinti shifted its coils, a slow, mesmerizing motion. The one who holds the lights is not a spirit to be challenged lightly. He is the old man of the sky, a being of immense power. His lodge is far from here, hidden where the land meets the roof of the world. He keeps the sun, the moon, and the stars in 3 boxes of increasing intricacy, nested within his home. He guards them with the jealousy of a miser guarding his last piece of dried meat. This was more than Yale had ever learned from the hushed human tales. The information was a key, a first crucial piece of a map. Why does he keep them? Why does the tide come in? Why does the snow fall? Some things simply are, Sinti replied. Perhaps he finds the world more peaceful this way. Perhaps he fears what the light will reveal. Or perhaps he is simply selfish. The reasons of spirits are often tangled, like the roots of the cedars. With that, the serpent began to slide away, its body moving in silent, fluid waves, disappearing into the ferns. Remember, little noisy thought, to steal from a god, one must be more than a thief. One must become a trickster, a weaver of new truths. Yale remained on the stump, the words settling into him. The old man of the sky, 3 boxes, a hidden lodge. The idea that had been a faint glow within him now burned with the steady intensity of a purpose. The gray world was no longer just a place to live. It was a problem to be solved. His journey had found its direction, even before his first true flight had begun. The first flight to the edge. The decision to leave the familiar confines of the whispering forest was not one Yale made with a single dramatic resolve. It grew within him, a slow, persistent pressure, like the taproot of a cedar seeking deeper soil. Sinti's words had planted a seed, and now it germinated, sending out tendrils of ambition and a restless, gnawing curiosity. The daily routines of foraging, of squabbling with other ravens, of perching on his favorite branch to watch the dim world go by, all began to feel trivial, a prelude to a greater song he was meant to sing. He began his preparations with a cunning that would become his hallmark. He practiced flying, not just for speed or agility, but for endurance. He would launch himself from the highest spruce, catching the updrafts that swirled around the mountain peaks, letting the cold, thin air buoy him for hours. He learned to read the subtle shifts in the wind, to feel the coming of rain in the pressure against his feathers, to navigate by the faint thermal gradients of the land below, since there were no stars to guide him. The world was a map written in textures and temperatures, and he committed it to memory. He also observed the humans more closely. He watched their fishermen note the behavior of gulls to find schools of herring, and he understood the concept of using signs. He saw their hunters study the tracks of deer, and he learned to read the stories written in the mud and the undergrowth. He listened to their stories, not just for the content, but for the patterns of their thinking, the things they feared, the things they desired. He learned that they saw us as a clever, sometimes troublesome bird, but never as a potential savior. This anonymity became his first and greatest weapon. The morning of his departure arrived with no fanfare. The mist was, as always, a clinging presence. The usual sounds of the forest, the chatter of squirrels, the drumming of a woodpecker, were muffled, making the world feel hushed and expectant. Yale had eaten a full meal of late-season berries and a fat grub he dug from a log. He stood on his high branch, feeling the familiar texture of the bark under his claws. He looked down at the human village, the smoke from their fires struggling to rise through the heavy air, and he felt a pang of something akin to fondness. He was leaving them, but he was also leaving for them. With a powerful push of his legs and a strong downward thrust of his wings, he launched himself into the sky. The familiar trees shrank beneath him, becoming a sea of dark green. He flew north, following the whispered directions Sinti had implied, where the land meets the roof of the world. He followed the coastline, where the jagged, black rock cliffs plunged into the churning, white-capped waters of the ocean. The air here was sharper, saltier, and the wind was a constant, buffeting force he had to lean into, his feathers adjusting minutely to maintain his course. For days he flew. The landscape below changed. The dense, temperate rainforests gave way to stunted, wind-sculpted pines, and then to vast, open tundra, a rolling expanse of hardy grasses and mosses painted in the same monotonous gray palette. The cold became a tangible enemy, seeping through his feathers, making his joints ache. He learned to find shelter in rocky crevices during the worst of the winds, huddling against the stone to preserve his body heat. He fed on what he could find: scattered crowberries, the eggs of ground-nesting birds, the carcass of a winter-killed caribou picked clean by other scavengers. The loneliness was a weight heavier than the fatigue. There was no one to talk to, no one to share in the struggle. The only sounds were the relentless wind, a sound like a great, mournful sigh, and the beat of his own wings, a steady, rhythmic whoosh-thump that marked the passage of time. He began to question his own sanity. What was a single raven against the will of a god? What arrogance had made him think he could succeed where generations of humans had failed? What, every time he considered turning back, he would remember the profound sadness in the eyes of the human elders, the listless play of their children, the way the world seemed to be holding its breath. He would remember the taste of the salmonberry, a burst of color in a gray world, and he would know that color, true and vibrant color, must exist somewhere. His desire to see it, to bring it back, became the fire that kept him warm in the freezing altitudes, the fuel that powered his tired wings. He was no longer just a curious bird. He was a pilgrim on a quest, and the horizon, though forever gray, was a promise he had to see fulfilled. The Old Man of the Sky. The journey stretched into a span of time Yale could no longer measure. The world became a place of stark, elemental forces. The ground far below was a jagged tapestry of glaciers and black, sharp-peaked mountains, their tops often shrouded in cloud. The air grew so thin and cold that each breath felt like drawing in shards of ice. His flight was a constant, grueling battle against a wind that seemed intent on pushing him back, a physical manifestation of the world's resistance to his goal. Just when his strength began to wane, when the cold had seeped so deep into his bones he feared his wings would lock in place, Salal unlocked it. At the very edge of the world, where the land crumbled away into a vast, formless void of mist, stood a structure. It was a lodge, but it was like no human lodge he had ever seen. It was woven from the roots of the world itself, crafted from petrified wood and veins of gleaming obsidian, and it was colossal, its peak lost in the low-hanging clouds. It exuded an aura of immense age and even greater power. A faint, rhythmic sound, like a gigantic heartbeat, emanated from within, a vibration Yell could feel in his breastbone. This was the home of the Old Man of the Sky. Landing cautiously on a nearby outcrop of rock, Yell studied the lodge. There was a single entrance, a low, wide opening covered by a heavy curtain made from the hide of some primordial beast. There were no guards, no obvious traps. The sheer, arrogant confidence of the place was its own defense. Who would be foolish enough to challenge the master of this domain? For 3 days and 3 nights, Yel waited and watched. Salal saw no one enter or leave. The only sign of life was the steady, rhythmic pulse from within, a sound that spoke of a slumbering, potent consciousness. He needed a plan. He could not simply fly in and snatch the boxes. The old man was a spirit of immense power. Brute force was not an option. Cunning was his only tool. He remembered Sinti's words, "To steal from a god, one must become a trickster." He thought about the humans, their vulnerabilities, and their strengths. He thought about their children. An idea, audacious and ridiculous, began to form in his mind. It was a plan that required not just cleverness, but a complete transformation, a performance of a lifetime. On the 4th day, he put his plan into action. Using skills honed from a lifetime of observation, he began to alter his own form. He focused his will, a force he had never known he possessed, channeling the latent magic of the trickster. His sleek black feathers softened, receding into smooth pink skin. His powerful wings shriveled into tiny clutching hands. His sharp, clever beak melted away, reshaping into the small, button-like nose of an infant. His body compacted, becoming soft, round, and utterly helpless. When the transformation was complete, where a majestic raven had once stood, there now lay a human newborn, wailing with a convincing, pathetic weakness. He lay there, just outside the lodge's entrance, his tiny body exposed to the biting cold. He poured all his artifice into that cry, making it a sound of pure, desperate need. It was a sound designed to pierce through the solitude of the most hardened heart. For a long time, nothing happened. The rhythmic pulse from within continued undisturbed. Doubt gnawed at him. Had he miscalculated? Was the old man so devoid of compassion that the sound of a dying child would not stir him? Just as his tiny lungs began to burn from the effort, the heavy hide curtain over the entrance stirred. A figure emerged, stooping low to pass through the doorway. He was ancient, his face a web of deep fissures, his long hair and beard the color of fresh fallen snow. His eyes, however, were not the weak, milky eyes of an old man. They were the color of a stormy sky, and they held the light of distant galaxies, a deep, swirling intelligence that saw to the core of things. This was the old man of the sky. He looked down at the squalling infant, his expression unreadable. A long moment passed, a silence filled only by Yale's manufactured cries. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of epochs, the old man bent down. His hands, large and gnarled like ancient tree roots, were surprisingly gentle when he scooped the tiny, cold body from the ground. "Hush, little one," the old man rumbled, his voice the sound of grinding tectonic plates, deep and resonant. "Where did you come from? How did you find this place?" He carried the infant Yale into the lodge. The interior was vast and shadowy, filled with the scent of dry herbs, old wood, and something else, a sharp ozone tang of immense power. And there, resting on a shelf of living rock near a low-burning fire of blue flames, Yale saw them. 3 boxes. They were exactly as Sinti had described. The smallest was an intricately carved chest of yellow cedar, its surface alive with patterns of inlaid abalone that shimmered even in the dim light. The middle box was darker, made of polished argillite, its surface smooth and mysterious. And there, resting on a shelf of living rock near a low-burning fire of blue flames, Yale saw them. 3 boxes. They were exactly as Sinti had described. The smallest was an intricately carved chest of yellow cedar, its surface alive with patterns of inlaid abalone that shimmered even in the dim light. The middle box was darker, made of polished argillite, its surface smooth and mysterious. The largest box was a plain, unadorned thing of heavy, iron-like wood, but it hummed with a contained energy that Yale could feel in his tiny, new teeth. The old man laid the infant on a bed of soft, cured furs near the fire. "You are safe here," he murmured, though his stormy eyes still held a flicker of suspicion. Yale, playing his part perfectly, ceased his crying and looked up at the Great Spirit with wide, innocent eyes. The first part of his impossible plan had worked. He was inside the lodge. He was surrounded by the very lights he sought to steal. The real game was only just beginning. The grip of greed. The interior of the old man's lodge became Yale's entire world, a realm of shadows and strange, quiet power. The air hung heavy and still, thick with the scent of dry, ancient things, preserved leaves, the dust of millennia, and the pungent aroma of herbs hung from the smoke-blackened rafters. The central fire, with its unnatural blue flames, cast a cold, flickering light that danced across the walls but failed to warm the vast, cavernous space. Its light licked at the surfaces of the 3 boxes on the rock shelf, making the abalone on the smallest one gleam with a sickly, captive beauty. The old man, whose name Yale learned was Noggin, moved through his domain with a slow, deliberate pace. Every action was measured, every gesture economical. He would tend his fire, he would sip from a bowl of clear water, he would sometimes sit for hours staring into the blue flames, his stormy eyes seeing things far beyond the walls of the lodge. He was a being of immense solitude, and his routines were as deep-set as the grooves in a glacier. Yale, in his infant form, became a student of this solitude. He learned the rhythms of Noggin's day. He memorized the way the old spirit's footsteps sounded on the hard-packed earth floor. He noted the specific way Noggin would handle his few possessions, a carved wooden ladle, a stone bowl, with a possessive, almost reverent care. This care was most evident when Noggin's gaze fell upon the 3 boxes. His eyes would linger on them, not with love or wonder, but with a hard, gleaming satisfaction, the look of a dragon resting upon its hoard. It was a pure, unadulterated greed. Yale's strategy was one of gradual, meticulous erosion. He played the part of a helpless, growing child to perfection. His cries were always timed to express need, not mere annoyance. His gurgles and coos were designed to seem like the innocent music of a simple mind. He learned to crawl, his tiny hands and knees scraping across the hard ground, his eyes wide with a feigned curiosity that led him again and again towards the shelf holding the boxes. "No, little one," Noggin would say, his voice a low rumble. He would scoop the infant up, his large hands surprisingly gentle but firm. "Those are not for you. Those are mine." The words were always the same, a possessive mantra, mine. They were spoken without malice, but with a finality that was more imposing than any lock or bar. Yale learned the shape of that word, the weight of it. It was the cornerstone of Noggin's entire being. Weeks bled into months. The infant grew into a toddling child. Yale's form became more comfortable, his disguise more entrenched. He began to babble, forming clumsy, broken words. He called Noggin grandfather, a term that seemed to both please and puzzle the ancient spirit. A faint, almost imperceptible softening began to occur around the edges of Noggin's stern demeanor. The constant, watchful suspicion in his stormy eyes began to wane, replaced by a familiar, almost paternal routine. He would share his meals of tasteless paste with the child, telling him simple stories of the formation of the mountains and the patience of stone. Yale listened, his mind a whirlwind of calculation behind his wide, innocent eyes. He saw the loneliness in Nagum, a deep and abiding emptiness that the possession of the lights could never fill. The old man did not love the sun, the moon, or the stars. He simply owned them. Their beauty was irrelevant to him. Their captivity was everything. This realization was a key turning in a lock within Yale's heart. His mission was no longer just about bringing light to his people. It became a moral imperative, a necessary act of liberation for the celestial bodies themselves. One day, while Nagun was in a particularly contemplative mood, staring into the blue flames, Yale toddled over to the shelf. He did not reach for the boxes. Instead, he pointed a chubby finger at the smallest, the one of gleaming yellow cedar. "What?" he asked, his voice a small, clear chime in the silent lodge. Nagun stirred from his reverie. He looked from the child to the box and back again. A long moment passed. "That," he said, his voice softer than usual, "is a secret." "Secret?" Yale repeated, tilting his head. "A thing that is known only to one," Nagun explained. "A thing of great power. A thing that is mine." "Can see?" Yale asked, layering his voice with a hopeful, naive wonder. Nagun's face tightened. The old possessiveness flashed in his eyes. "No, it is not for seeing. It is for keeping." Yale let his lower lip tremble. He allowed a sheen of tears to gloss his eyes, making them look large and wounded. He did not cry. He simply let the disappointment show, a silent, profound sorrow. The old man watched him. The silence stretched, becoming a tangible thing in the lodge. Yale could feel the spirit's internal struggle, the ingrained habit of refusal warring with the new, unfamiliar impulse to grant a request, to soothe the child he had, in his own way, come to care for. "It is not a toy," Nagun said, his voice a defensive grumble. Yale simply stood there, the picture of dejected innocence. The performance was a masterstroke. It appealed not to Nagun's Arid, but to the fragile, nascent connection he felt to this foundling. With a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, Nagun stood up. His joints creaked like old trees in the wind. He walked to the shelf, his movements slow and heavy. He did not pick up the box. Instead, he merely lifted the lid of the yellow cedar chest, just a crack. He did it quickly, a furtive, almost shameful gesture. Instantly, a thin, brilliant sliver of golden light escaped from the box. It cut through the gloomy atmosphere of the lodge like a blade. It was not the weak, gray light of the outside world. This was a living, vibrant, warm light. It illuminated the dust motes in the air, making them dance like tiny fairies. It gleamed on the polished argillite of the middle box and highlighted the grain of the large wooden one. For a single, breathtaking moment, the lodge was no longer a tomb for light. It was a chapel. In that same moment, Yale felt a sensation he had never known: warmth. True, physical warmth that seeped into his skin and thrilled his blood. It was a feeling of life, of energy, of pure, undiluted joy. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. Nagun, his face a mask of anxiety, slammed the lid shut. The brilliant sliver of light vanished, extinguished. The lodge plunged back into its customary gloom, the blue fire seeming weak and pathetic in comparison. The afterimage of the sun's light burned in Yale's vision, a golden scar on his soul. "You see," Nagun said, his voice rough with a strange emotion, a mixture of pride in his possession and fear at having revealed it. "It is powerful. It is mine. Now, no more questions." He turned away, returning to his place by the fire, but the atmosphere in the lodge had shifted irrevocably. Yale had seen it. He had felt it. The goal was no longer an abstract idea. It was a memory of golden warmth imprinted on his very being. The greed of the old man was a formidable fortress, but Yale, the patient trickster, had just found its first tiny crack. The dance of deception. The fleeting glimpse of the sun's light ignited a new, feverish urgency within Yale. The memory of that golden warmth became a constant, humming energy under his skin, a stark contrast to the pervasive chill of the lodge. His performance as the innocent child needed to become more nuanced, a delicate dance on a tightrope stretched over an abyss of divine wrath. He could not appear too eager, too focused on the boxes. He had to make Nagun want to show him. He began his new campaign with subtlety. He took to playing with a small, smooth stone he found near the fire pit, rolling it across the floor, chasing it with his clumsy toddler's gait. He would make a game of hiding it, of seeking it, his laughter echoing in the vast space. He was teaching Nagun the concepts of loss and rediscovery, of the joy that could be found in something being momentarily gone and then returned. "Grandfather," he would say, holding up the stone, "I found it. It was lost, but now it is found." Nagun would grunt in response, but Yale saw the way the old spirit's eyes would flicker towards the boxes, a flicker of subconscious connection being made. Yale also began to comment on the oppressive gloom of the lodge. He did not complain. He simply observed with a child's blunt honesty. "It is dark here," he would remark, staring at the blue flames. "The fire is cold." "It is the way it is," Nagun would reply, his tone final. "But outside," Yale would press, his voice soft, "is it also dark?" "The whole world is dark," Nagun said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "It is a quiet world, a peaceful world. My light makes it so." Your stolen light, Yale thought, but he kept his face a mask of innocent acceptance. He was planting seeds of doubt, framing the world's darkness not a state of peace, but a state of lack. The turning point came during a long, silent period when Nagun seemed more withdrawn than usual. He sat by his blue fire, not moving, his stormy eyes clouded with a deep, timeless melancholy. The loneliness that Yale had identified was a gaping chasm within him. Yale, sensing the opportunity, abandoned his stone and toddled over to the Great Spirit. He did not speak. He simply leaned against Nagun's leg, a small, warm weight of companionship. The contact was electric. Nagun flinched, so unused was he to physical touch. He looked down at the child, his ancient face unreadable. Then, slowly, a large, gnarled hand came to rest on Yale's head. The gesture was awkward, but it was filled with a profound, unspoken need. "You are a strange child," Nagun murmured, his voice like the shifting of continents. "You are not afraid of this place. You are not afraid of me." Yale looked up, meeting the stormy gaze. "You are grandfather," he said simply, layering the words with a trust that was both a lie and, in that complex moment, a strange kind of truth. The following day, Nagun was different. A restless energy had replaced his customary stillness. He paced the lodge, his eyes returning again and again to the 3 boxes. Yale continued his games, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel the moment approaching, a precipice he had been carefully constructing for months. Finally, Nagun stopped his pacing. He stood before the shelf, his back to Yale. "Child," he said, his voice tight, "come here." Yale's breath caught in his throat. He walked over, his small feet making no sound on the hard earth. Noggin pointed to the smallest box, the yellow cedar one. "You remember the light?" Yale nodded, his eyes wide. "It is the sun," Noggin said, the word resonating in the lodge with a power that made the very air vibrate. "Sun. It is the source of all warmth. It makes things grow. It is the eye of the day." He spoke not with poetry, but with the pride of a cataloger listing the attributes of his most prized specimen. He then pointed to the middle box, the one of polished argillite. "This one holds the moon. It is the sun's quiet sister. It governs the tides of the sea and the dreams of mortals. Its light is a light of secrets and silver." Lastly, he gestured to the large, plain box of ironwood. "And this," he said, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper, "holds the stars. Countless points of cold fire, the scattered jewels of the night. They are a map to mysteries even I do not fully understand." He turned to look at Yale, his stormy eyes blazing with a possessive fervor. "They are all mine, the only ones in all of existence. I gathered them when the world was young, when the noise and the color became too much. I brought silence and order." Yale listened, absorbing every word. He understood now. Noggin was not just a miser. He was a god who had rejected the vibrant chaos of creation in favor of a sterile, controlled gray. He was an artist who had locked away all the colors. "They are beautiful," Yale whispered, his voice full of genuine awe, though its source was the very opposite of Nagun's. "They are powerful," Nagun corrected him. But then a strange thing happened. A look of vulnerability, fleeting and quickly suppressed, crossed his ancient features. The loneliness, the need for a witness to his glory, overwhelmed his caution. Would you like to see the moon?" The question hung in the air. This was the moment. Yale knew that to show too much eagerness would be disastrous. He feigned a slight hesitation, a touch of uncertainty. "Is it safe, grandfather?" The concern, false though it was, pleased Nagun. It reinforced his role as the powerful protector. "It is safe when I show it to you," he said, his chest swelling slightly. "It is mine to command." He reached for the argillite box. His hands, usually so steady, trembled with a faint excitement. He lifted the lid. There was no explosive burst of light this time. Instead, a soft, luminous, silver glow spilled out from the box, filling the lodge with a cool, serene radiance. It was the light of 1,000 peaceful nights, of calm seas and quiet thoughts. In the center of the glow floated the moon itself, a perfect, luminous pearl, its surface marbled with shades of silver and gray. It cast long, soft shadows, transforming the gloomy lodge into a place of ethereal beauty. The light felt gentle on Yale's skin, a soothing balm compared to the sun's vibrant energy. It spoke of introspection and mystery. Nagun watched Yale's face, drinking in the child's wonder. It was the validation he craved. For a few minutes, he let the moon's light bathe the lodge. Then, with a sigh that was part satisfaction, part reluctance, he closed the lid. The silver glow faded, leaving the blue fire once again as the primary source of light. "You see," Nagun said, his voice hushed, "it is mine." Yale nodded, his mind racing. The dance was complete. He had manipulated the god's loneliness and pride to achieve his goal. He had seen 2 of the 3 lights. He now knew their nature, their essence. The plan was solidifying in his mind. He could not take all 3 at once. It had to be a sequence, a series of thefts. The first target was clear: the sun, the source of life itself. The great theft was now inevitable. The trickster had been invited into the vault, and he would not leave empty-handed. The heist of the sun. The revelation of the moon's serene light left an indelible mark on the atmosphere within the lodge. A new, fragile tension hummed in the air, a taut wire strung between Nagun's pride and Yale's concealed purpose. The old man seemed both invigorated and unnerved by his own act of sharing. He would often glance at Yale with a speculative, almost wary expression, as if trying to decipher the thoughts behind the child's wide, admiring eyes. The trust was a thin veneer, and Yale knew a single misstep would shatter it into a million pieces. He had to act soon. The memory of the sun's warmth was a constant, aching hunger in his core. He began the final preparations for the theft, his movements within the infantile disguise becoming a study in controlled intention. He noted the exact weight of the yellow cedar box when Nagun lifted it, the way the old spirit's fingers curled around its edges. He studied the latch, a simple but robust mechanism of carved bone that slid into a groove. He observed the specific spot on the shelf where it rested, the faint dust-free outline it left on the stone. His plan was one of audacious simplicity, relying on the very trust he had so carefully cultivated. He would use Nagun's own routines against him. The old man, for all his power, was a creature of habit. Every day, after a meal of the bland paste, he would enter a state of deep contemplation for a precisely measured period, his breathing becoming slow and rhythmic, his stormy eyes losing their focus as he communed with the deep, silent currents of the world. During this time, he was not asleep, but he was profoundly distracted, his consciousness turned inward. Yale chose his moment with the precision of a master hunter. He had eaten his own portion of paste, sitting quietly and projecting an aura of drowsy contentment. When Nagun settled into his customary spot by the blue fire, his back to the shelf, and his breathing began to slow, Yale made his move. He did not rush. A sudden movement would be like a shout in the silent lodge. Instead, he rose with a toddler's natural, unsteady curiosity. He hummed a soft, tuneless little song, a sound of innocent play. He wandered, seemingly aimlessly, towards the rock shelf. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs, so loud he feared Nagun would hear it. The air felt thick, resistant, like wading through deep water. He reached the shelf. The 3 boxes sat there, pulsing with their contained power. The yellow cedar box seemed to call to him, the abalone inlay winking in the blue firelight. He stretched his small, chubby hands towards it. His fingers, clumsy in this form, brushed against the smooth, polished wood. It felt warm, vibrating with the immense energy it held captive. He could not simply lift it. It was too heavy, too large for his child's body to carry with any speed. This was a contingency he had prepared for. He focused his will, the same trickster magic that had allowed him to change his form. He poured his intention not into his own body, but into the box itself. He envisioned it becoming smaller, lighter, a trinket instead of a treasure chest. A subtle shimmer passed over the box. The intricate carvings seemed to writhe for a moment, contracting. The box shrunk, condensing down to the size of a large clamshell, its weight diminishing to something he could easily clutch in one hand. It was a desperate, risky use of power, and he felt a wave of dizziness pass over him. He snatched a now small box, his fingers closing around it. The warmth was immediate and intense, a comforting heat that seeped into his palm. He turned, the stolen sun concealed against his chest. He took one step, then two, back towards his sleeping furs. The distance seemed to stretch, an impossible gulf. Each footfall was a thunderclap in the silence. He could feel the weight of Nagun's presence behind him, a mountain of dormant power. He was halfway across the lodge when a voice, cold and sharp like breaking ice, cut through the stillness. "Child." Yale froze. His blood turned to frost in his veins. He did not turn around. "What do you hold?" Nagun's voice was low, devoid of its earlier softness. It was the voice of the master of the sky, the hoarder of light. Yale's mind raced, a panicked animal seeking any escape. To run was to admit guilt and be caught instantly. To drop the box was to lose his one chance. He had one last card to play, a final, desperate act of trickery. He turned slowly, forcing his face into a mask of childish confusion. In his hand, he held not the shrunken sunbox, but the small, smooth stone he played with. He had used the last dregs of his magical energy to create a simple illusion, overlaying the image of the stone onto the box. It was a fragile glamour, a whisper of deception that would not withstand close scrutiny. "My stone, grandfather," he said, his voice a little too high, a little too tight. "I was going to sleep with it." Nagun was standing now. His immense form seemed to fill the lodge, blocking out the light of the blue fire. His stormy eyes were narrowed, piercing. They bored into Yale, into the illusion. The silence stretched, a thin thread about to snap. Yale could feel the god's will pressing against his own, a vast psychic weight trying to discern the truth. For a long, agonizing moment, Yale believed he had failed. He could feel the glamour straining, flickering at the edges. He poured every ounce of his being into maintaining it, into the simple, innocent belief that he held nothing but a plaything. Then, miraculously, the pressure receded. Nagun's shoulders slumped slightly. The suspicion in his eyes faded, replaced by a weary, self-reproaching look. He was chiding himself for his paranoia, for suspecting the harmless child he had taken in. "Go to sleep, then," Nagun murmured, turning back to the fire. "It is late." Yale did not need to be told twice. He scurried to his bed of furs, his small body trembling with adrenaline and relief. He curled up, clutching the stolen sun to his chest. The illusion dissipating now that the direct scrutiny was gone. The real warm box was pressed against him, a secret fire. He lay there for what felt like an eternity, listening to the slow, rhythmic sound of Nagun's breathing returning to its meditative state. He had done it. He had stolen the sun from under the nose of a god. The first and most vital piece of his quest was in his possession. But the danger was far from over. The moment Nagun turned his gaze to the shelf and saw the empty space where the yellow cedar box had been, all hell would break loose. He had to be gone, far from this place, before that happened. The greatest escape of his life was now his only path to survival. The fury of the firmament. Yale did not sleep. He lay perfectly still in his nest of furs, the stolen sunbox a burning brand against his skin. The warmth it emitted was no longer a comfort. It was an accusation, a beacon that felt like it must surely be visible to Nagun's senses. Every shift in the old spirit's breathing, every faint creak of the lodge, sent a fresh jolt of terror through his small frame. He was a mouse that had stolen a jewel from a sleeping lion, and the lion's den was all around him. He waited for the perfect moment to make his escape. It came in the deepest part of the lodge's timeless night, when the blue flames of the fire had dwindled to mere embers and Noggin's contemplative state was at its most profound. The rhythmic pulse that emanated from the old man was slow and steady, the heartbeat of a universe at rest. Moving with a slowness that was agonizing, Yell pushed back the furs. The cold air of the lodge bit into his skin, a stark contrast to the heat of the box he clutched. He rose to his feet, his muscles screaming with tension. He did not look back at Noggin. To do so would be to invite the evil eye, to break the fragile spell of inattention. He padded towards the heavy hide curtain that served as the lodge's door. Each step was a deliberate, controlled placement of his foot, testing the ground for any telltale creak. The distance to the entrance was only 20 paces, but it felt like a journey across a continent. The air was thick with the scent of his own fear. He reached the curtain. It was heavy, made from the hide of a beast he could not name, and it smelled of age and dry wind. He used his free hand to push it aside, just enough for his small body to slip through. A sliver of the gray, mist-choked world outside greeted him. The wind howled a low, mournful note, a sound of pure desolation. He slipped through the gap. The moment he was outside, the full, biting cold of the high altitude assaulted him. It was a physical blow, stealing his breath. The mist clung to him, damp and icy. He had no time to acclimatize. He had to transform, to shed this helpless infant form and become the raven again, the creature of flight and freedom. He scrambled away from the lodge, finding a small, sheltered alcove formed by two large, jutting rocks. He huddled there, the stolen box held tight. He closed his eyes, pushing away the cold and the fear, and focused on his true self. He envisioned his glossy black feathers, his powerful wings, his sharp, clever beak. He felt the magic surge within him, a welcome and familiar power. The small, soft limbs of the child elongated and hardened. The pink skin darkened and was covered by a cascade of sleek, black plumage. His form swelled, growing into the familiar, robust shape of the raven. The transformation was a relief, a return to his own skin. But he was not yet safe. He held the sunbox in his claw. It was still shrunken, but it was a burden, an object that did not belong in this world. He had to get it home. He launched himself into the air. The wind, which had been a foe on his journey north, was now a potential ally. He caught a fierce updraft, letting it carry him up and away from the lodge, his powerful wings beating hard, driving himself towards home. He had flown for what he guessed was an hour, the gray landscape unfolding beneath him in a blur of rock and ice when the world changed. It began with a sound, a deep, resonant roar that seemed to originate from the very fabric of the sky. It was not the sound of the wind. It was a sound of pure, undiluted fury. It was Nagun's voice, amplified to a cosmic scale. The gray mist itself seemed to recoil, tearing apart like rotten cloth. The air shuddered. Yale risked a glance back over his shoulder. The horizon behind him was no longer a passive gray. It was a swirling maelstrom of darkness. Black clouds, shot through with veins of angry non-celestial light, boiled forth from the direction of the lodge, spreading across the firmament with terrifying speed. It was the physical manifestation of a god's wrath. "Thief!" The word slammed into Yale like a physical wave, nearly knocking him from the sky. It was filled with such betrayal, such incandescent rage, that it felt like a brand searing his soul. Nagun had discovered the theft. The storm of fury pursued him. Lightning, black and silent, cracked through the churning clouds. The wind, which had been his ally, now turned against him, becoming a screaming gale that sought to tear the feathers from his body and dash him against the jagged mountains below. Icy hail, sharp as flint, began to pelt him, stinging his eyes and weighing down his wings. This was no ordinary storm. This was a sentient hurricane, a being of vengeance whose sole purpose was to reclaim what had been stolen. Yale flew for his life. He tucked the precious sunbox tight against his body, streamlining his form. He dove, he swerved, he rode the violent thermals, using every ounce of skill he had learned over a lifetime of flight. The world became a tunnel of howling wind and freezing rain, with a single point of light at its end, the memory of home. He flew until his muscles burned with fatigue, until his wings felt like leaden weights. The storm was relentless, gaining on him. He could feel Nagun's will in every buffeting gust, in every stinging piece of hail. The god's anger was a vast net, and he was a tiny bird struggling to escape its weave. He knew he could not outrun it forever. He was tiring, and the storm was eternal. He had to hide the sun. He could not let it be taken back. Looking down, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the landscape below had changed. He was over the great, rolling tundra now. In the distance, he could see the dark line of the forest, the beginning of his home. But the storm was upon him. The wind snatched at the box in his claw. He felt it loosen. With a desperate, last-ditch effort, he made a decision. He could not carry it to safety. He had to secure it. Spying a gnarled, ancient juniper tree clinging to the side of a rocky bluff below, he dove. He tucked his wings and fell like a black stone, the wind screaming past him. He landed roughly in the twisted branches of the tree. With frantic speed, he used his beak and claws to dig a small hollow in the thick, fibrous trunk. He shoved the warm, pulsating sunbox deep into the hollow, then tore off a piece of loose bark to cover the opening, camouflaging it with moss and lichen. No sooner had he finished than the full force of the storm broke over him. The wind ripped him from the tree, sending him tumbling head over claws through the raging air. He lost all sense of direction, a leaf in a hurricane. The world was a vortex of noise and violence. He was battered, beaten, and thrown across the sky. The image of the hidden sun, the last coherent thought in his mind before darkness consumed him. The great thief had been caught, and his prize was lost, hidden in the wild, waiting to be found again. The ascent from darkness. Consciousness returned to Yale in a series of painful, disjointed flickers. The first sensation was a deep, pervasive ache that seemed to radiate from the very marrow of his bones. The second was the cold, a wet, penetrating chill that had settled deep into his feathers. The third was a profound silence, broken only by the drip of water and the ragged sound of his own breathing. He opened his eyes. He was lying in a heap at the bottom of a deep, narrow ravine. High above, through a fissure in the rock, he could see the sky, still its customary, oppressive gray. The sentient storm had passed, its fury spent or its attention diverted. Jagged rocks, slick with moisture, rose on either side of him. A thin trickle of icy water ran over the stones beneath him, soaking his plumage. He was battered, bruised, and one of his wings screamed in protest when he tried to move it. A sprain, perhaps, or something worse. The memory of the previous hours flooded back. The theft, the flight, the storm, the hiding of the sun. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. The sun! He had hidden it in a juniper tree on a bluff, but where? The storm had disoriented him completely. He had no idea how far he had been thrown, or in what direction. He tried to stand, his claws scraping weakly against the wet stone. A wave of dizziness washed over him. He was injured, lost, and he had failed. The sun was hidden, but it was just us lost to the world, us it had been in Nagoon's lodge. His great quest had ended not in triumph, but in ignominious defeat at the bottom of a ravine. Despair, a feeling far colder than the icy water, began to seep into him. He had risked everything, deceived a god, and for what? To lose the prize in the wilderness? The gray world seemed to mock him, its muted tones a testament to his failure. He thought of the human villages, of their quiet sorrow, and a shame hotter than the sun's warmth burned in his chest. For a long time, he simply lay there, allowing the despair to have its way with him. The will to move, to fight, had been beaten out of him by the storm and his injuries. He was just a raven, a trickster who had flown too high and been dashed back to earth. It was then that a sound reached him, faint but distinct. It was a soft, chittering noise. He turned his head, a slow, painful movement. A small, sleek water shrew was watching him from a nearby rock, its black eyes bright with curiosity. It twitched its nose, then scurried away, disappearing into a crack in the ravine wall. The simple, mundane act of life, the shrew's unthinking struggle for survival, struck a chord in Yale's heart. It was a reminder that the world, even in its grayness, was still alive. It was still worth fighting for. He had not come this far, had not been so clever and so brave to give up at the first true setback. With a gargantuan effort, he pushed himself upright. He tested his injured wing, extending it slowly. Pain shot through the joint, but the bones seemed intact. It was not broken, only badly wrenched. He could not fly, not yet, but he could hop. He could climb. He looked up at the steep, slick walls of the ravine. The climb would be treacherous, especially in his weakened state, but it was the only way. He had to get his bearings. He had to find that juniper tree. His ascent from the darkness was a trial of pure endurance. He used his beak and his good claw to find purchase in the tiny cracks and crevices of the rock face. He pulled himself up, inch by painful inch. His injured wing dragged behind him, a useless weight. Several times his grip failed, and he slid back down, scraping his breast and tearing feathers. Each time he stopped, gathered his strength, and began again. He thought of Senti, the serpent, and its words about becoming a weaver of new truths. He thought of the feel of the sun's light on his skin. He thought of the hope that had glimmered in the eyes of the human elders when they spoke the old stories. These memories became handholds, pulling him upward when his physical strength failed. After what felt like an eternity, his head cleared the lip of the ravine. He hauled his exhausted body over the edge and collapsed onto flat ground, panting heavily. He was on a wide, rocky plateau. The wind, now just a normal, brisk breeze, whipped across it. He forced himself to stand, turning in a slow circle, scanning the horizon.
To the north, the direction he had come from, the sky was still turbulent, a reminder of Nagun's enduring wrath. To the south, he could see the dark, familiar line of the great forest. And there, to the east, just on the edge of the tundra before the forest began, he saw it. A solitary, gnarled juniper tree clinging to a rocky bluff. A croak of relief and triumph escaped his beak. He had found it. The sun was still hidden. The quest was still alive. He was still too injured to fly directly to it. His journey would have to be a slow, laborious hop and a walk across the open ground. It would take time, and he was exposed. But he was no longer in despair. He had faced the fury of the firmament and the depths of his own failure, and he had climbed out. The path ahead was long and dangerous, but the goal was once again in sight. The trickster had been humbled, but he was not broken. The great thief still had work to do. The hidden ember. The journey across the rocky plateau was a testament to pain and perseverance. Each hop sent a jolt through Yale's body, a sharp reminder of his injured wing and the battering he had endured. The wind, now a constant, nagging presence, plucked at his disheveled feathers, seeking to steal what little warmth his body could generate. The landscape was a monochrome expanse of gray stone and hardy gray-green lichen, a vista that seemed to stretch into infinity.
His world had shrunk to the next rock, the next patch of ground, the next painful forward motion. His focus was absolute, a single, burning point of intention fixed upon the gnarled juniper tree in the distance. It was a speck on the horizon, a twisted, dark shape against the lighter gray of the sky. He did not allow himself to think of the vast distance yet to be covered, nor of the lurking dangers of the open tundra, the sharp-eyed foxes, the silent, gliding owls. He simply moved, driven by the memory of warmth and the crushing weight of his responsibility. The sun, his stolen ember, was hidden, but it was not safe. Nagun's wrath was a palpable force in the northern skies, a brooding presence that could descend upon him at any moment. The old man of the sky would be searching, his senses scouring the land for the unique signature of his lost treasure. Every moment Yale spent exposed on this plateau was a moment of profound risk. Alayhi salam, he hopped and scrambled. His mind replayed the moment of concealment. The rough texture of the juniper bark under his claws, the frantic digging, the way the warm box had fit so perfectly into the hollow he had made. He had acted on instinct, a desperate gamble to keep the light from being snatched back by the storm. Now, that same instinct pulled him forward, an unbreakable tether connecting him to his prize. Hours bled into one another, marked only by the growing ache in his muscles and the slow, imperceptible crawl of the juniper tree as it grew larger on the horizon. The sameness of the landscape was a psychological trial. Without the sun to mark the passage of day, without the moon to define the night, time became a flat, featureless plain. His thirst became a rasping dryness in his throat, and his hunger a hollow ache in his belly. He paused to peck at a few hardy crowberries, their tart juice a fleeting relief, and to drink from a shallow pool of rainwater collected in a granite depression. Finally, as a deep, pervasive chill began to seep into the air, signaling the onset of what passed for night in this gray world, he reached the base of the bluff. The juniper tree stood above him, its roots digging like iron fingers into the cracked rock. The climb up the bluff was another ordeal, a vertical repetition of his escape from the ravine. His good claw was raw and bleeding by the time he hauled himself onto the narrow ledge where the tree grew. He stood before it, his chest heaving.
The tree was ancient, its trunk thick and twisted into a spiral, as if it had spent its long life wrestling with the wind. The patch of bark and moss he had used to conceal the hollow was still in place, undisturbed. A wave of relief so powerful it made his legs tremble washed over him. He had done it. He had reclaimed the first part of his mission. With meticulous care, he used his beak to pry away the covering. The moment the hollow was exposed, a wave of golden warmth flowed out, bathing his face and breast. The sight of the small cedar wood box, pulsing gently with contained luminescence, was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. It was a tiny, hidden heart of fire in a world of stone and shadow. He could not stay here. This was a temporary cache, not a destination. He had to get the sun to its proper place in the world. But how? He was still injured. He could not fly with the box, not yet. And releasing it here, on this isolated bluff, felt wrong. The sun was not meant for a single, hidden crevice. It was meant for the whole sky, for every living thing. He needed a new plan. He needed to heal, and he needed help. The memory of the human village, nestled in the protective embrace of the forest, surfaced in his mind. They were the reason for this quest. Perhaps they could also be his means to complete it. They had canoes for travel, and their knowledge of the land was deep. But could he trust them? Could he reveal his secret, his great theft, to mortals? He made a decision. He would take the sun to the edge of the human world. He would find a safe place to hide it while he recovered his strength and devised a way to launch it into the heavens. Carefully, he lifted the warm, shrunken box from its hollow. He would carry it in his beak, a precarious but necessary method since his injured claw was too unreliable. His journey now had a new direction, south towards the forest and the sea. The descent from the bluff was careful and slow, each movement calculated to protect his precious cargo. When his feet touched the soft, mossy ground of the tundra's edge, he felt a shift. He was leaving the domain of rock and wind and entering the realm of life. Stunted trees began to appear, then thicker stands of pine and spruce. He traveled through the deepening gloom, the sunbox a small, comforting weight in his beak, its warmth a constant reassurance against the growing cold of the night. The forest closed around him, its familiar sense of damp earth and pine sap a welcome balm. He found a hollow at the base of a giant cedar, its roots forming a natural vault. He nestled the sunbox deep within, covering it with a blanket of dry moss and fallen needles. Exhausted, he settled himself beside the hidden ember, his body curled around the root that concealed it. The warmth seeped into his battered muscles, soothing the pain. For the first time since the theft, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. He had the sun. It was hidden, but it was free from Nagun's lodge. The first and most vital battle had been won. The war for the sky, however, was just beginning. The great thief, wounded but unyielding, slept with his stolen fire, dreaming of a dawn he had yet to create. The Council of Beings. Yale's sleep was not a restful surrender, but a shallow, fevered thing, haunted by visions of churning black clouds and the echoing roar of a betrayed god. He woke with a start, the first feeble gray light filtering through the dense canopy above. Pain was his first conscious companion, a deep, throbbing ache in his wing, and a general soreness that permeated his entire body. His second awareness was the persistent, reassuring warmth emanating from the hollow beneath the cedar root. The sun was still there. The world was still dark, but the promise of light was safe. He could not stay here long. The warmth, while a comfort to him, was also a risk. A passing hunter, attuned to the subtle signs of the forest, might notice the unnatural heat radiating from the tree base. A wandering bear, its senses keen, might be drawn to investigate. He needed to move the sung to a more secure location, and he needed a plan to get it into the sky. He could not do it alone. Emerging from his shelter, he drank from a nearby stream, the icy water clearing the fog of pain and exhaustion from his mind. He needed counsel. He was a creature of cleverness and trickery, but the task before him, launching a celestial body into the firmament, required a wisdom beyond his own. He thought of Sinti, the serpent, but the journey back to the high mountains was impossible in his current state. He needed allies closer to home. He remembered a place, a clearing deep in the oldest part of the forest, where the trees grew so large their branches created a perpetual twilight. It was a place of power, a neutral ground where the ancient beings of the wood sometimes gathered. It was known as the Whispering Stone, for a large, flat-topped monolith of granite that stood in its center, a stone that was said to carry voices to the spirit world. His flight there was a hobbled, lopsided affair. He could not achieve true lift, so he resorted to a series of frantic, fluttering hops from branch to branch, his injured wing held tight against his body. It was slow, undignified progress, but it was progress. The forest watched him pass.
He felt the gaze of unseen eyes from the shadows, the subtle shifting of presence in the undergrowth. The news of his deed, he sensed, had already begun to ripple through the web of life. When he finally reached the clearing, he found it was not empty. The air was still and heavy, charged with a silent expectation. Perched on a high branch of a surrounding hemlock was Julian, the crow, his feathers a glossy, arrogant black, his eyes sharp and knowing. Lounging on a sun-warmed patch of moss was Anu, the brown bear, massive and powerful, her slow, deep breaths a rhythm of immense patience. And coiled around the base of the Whispering Stone itself was Sinti, the serpent. Its ancient, geometric-patterned body was draped over the gray rock, and its obsidian eyes were fixed on Yale as he awkwardly fluttered down to the stone's surface. No one spoke. The silence was a judgment. Yale stood before them, battered and disheveled, the evidence of his struggle plain to see. He was the one who had disturbed the balance. He was the one who had drawn the fury of the sky down upon the world. It was Julian who broke the silence, his voice a dry, mocking caw. Well, well, the little noisy thought returns, and it seems the sky did not appreciate your borrowing. Yale met his gaze, refusing to be cowed. I did not borrow, I stole, and I have no intention of giving it back. A low rumble came from Anu the bear. It was not a growl of threat, but a sound of deep contemplation. The old man's anger shakes the mountains. The salmon are nervous in the streams. The world holds its breath. This is a dangerous game, Featherbringer. The world has been holding its breath for generations, Yale's retort was sharp, fueled by the memory of the human sorrow and the feel of the sun's warmth. It is a game that needed to be played. I have the sun. It is hidden, safe from Nagun, but it is trapped on the earth. It belongs in the sky. All eyes turned to Sinti. The serpent was the oldest, its knowledge woven into the very roots of the world. It uncoiled slightly, its scales rasping against the stone. You have done a thing that is both foolish and brave, little one, Sinti hissed. To steal from a god is one matter. To keep the theft is another. To make the stolen thing your own, to weave it into the fabric of the world, that is the greatest challenge. Nagun's power is in possession. Your power, must be in release. How? Yale asked, the single word laden with all his frustration and hope. How do I release it? I cannot fly high enough. My wing is injured. I am just one raven. You are not just one raven, Anu rumbled. You are the one who Salalalai the Gray and called it a lie. You are the one who dared. But daring is not enough. You need a lever to move the world. Julian flapped his wings, a dismissive gesture. Lever? Nonsense. What you need is a distraction. The old man's eye is upon you, thief. While he watches you, he cannot watch everything. Cinti's head weaved slowly from side to side. The crow speaks a sliver of truth, a diversion, but the act itself, the sky is a great bowl turned over the world. To place the sun within it, you must throw it from the highest point, with a force that can break through the gray. The highest point. Yale knew the place. It was a mountain that stood at the very edge of the sea, a solitary peak whose top was often shrouded in cloud, the highest place in the known world. It was a daunting journey, especially injured and carrying the sun. The journey will be long, Yale said, a plan beginning to form in his mind, and I cannot do it alone. I will need help to reach the mountain, and I will need a distraction to occupy Nagun. Anu let out another deep rumble. The humans. They have long canoes that can travel the coastline faster than you can fly in your state. They know the paths of the sea, and they have the most to gain. And the distraction? Yale asked, looking at Julian. The crow preened a feather on his wing, a picture of nonchalant cunning. Leave that to me and my kind. We are many. We are loud. We can make a racket at the edge of the world, a nuisance to draw a god's gaze. We will make him look north while you go south. A sense of momentous agreement settled over the clearing. The beings of the forest, often at odds, were uniting for a common cause. The weasel, the fox, the wolf, all would play their parts, spreading chaos and confusion at the boundaries of Nagun's domain. Yale looked from the bear, to the crow, to the serpent. He was no longer alone. His individual trickery had blossomed into a collective conspiracy. The plan was audacious, a symphony of coordinated action across the whole of the land. Then it is decided, Yale said, his voice firm. I will go to the humans. I will show them the sun. And together we will take it to the top of the world and give it back to the sky. He bowed his head to the council of beings. The path was clear. The most perilous part of his adventure, the alliance with humanity, was about to begin. The gift of fire in a darkened lodge. Leaving the council of beings, Yale felt a new kind of weight settle upon him, the weight of a shared purpose. His was no longer a solitary secret. The forest itself was now his accomplice. But the most critical alliance remained to be forged. He had to reveal himself and his stolen treasure to the humans. He returned to the hidden hollow beneath the cedar root. The sunbox was still warm, its presence a comforting pulse against his breast when he retrieved it. Holding it carefully in his beak, he began the slow, ground-based journey towards the human village. He moved with a new caution, not just for his own safety, but for the success of the larger plan. Chulyen and his crows would already be winging their way north, beginning their campaign of noisy misdirection. He could not afford to be discovered now.
The village came into view as he crested a small rise. It looked more forlorn than ever in the uniform gray light. The longhouses, their massive cedar plank walls darkened by moisture, seemed to huddle together for warmth that did not exist. Canoes were drawn up on the pebbled beach, idle. A few figures moved slowly between the buildings, their postures slumped, their movements devoid of energy. The air was silent, save for the ever-present sigh of the wind and the distant cry of a gull. He needed to speak to the one who would understand, the one who held the old stories. The village speaker, an elder whose eyes held the deep, patient sorrow of generations. Yale knew which longhouse was his, the largest one, adorned with the faded and weathered crests of raven, eagle, and whale. He waited until full night had fallen, a darkness so complete it felt like a physical substance. The only lights in the village were the faint orange glows from the smoke holes of the longhouses. Using the shadows as his cloak, he hopped silently to the base of the speaker's longhouse. He could hear the low murmur of voices from within. There was a gap between the wall planks, wide enough for a raven to slip through. He pushed his way inside, the sunbox clutched tight. The interior of the longhouse was vast and shadowy. A central fire pit glowed with red embers, casting a dim, pulsating light that danced over the carved houseposts and the sleeping platforms lined with furs. The air was thick with the smells of smoke, dried fish, and human life. The village speaker, an ancient man with a face like a weathered mask of cedar wood, sat alone near the fire, staring into the coals. His hands, gnarled and expressive, rested on his knees. Yale landed on the hard-packed earth floor with a soft thud. The speaker looked up, his eyes, deep-set and intelligent, widening in surprise. It was not common for a raven to enter a human dwelling so boldly. Yale knew he had to bridge the gap between their kinds instantly. He could not speak their language in his raven form, but he could show them. He placed the small cedarwood box on the ground before the fire pit. Then he began to change. It was easier this time, the magic flowing more readily, perhaps fueled by the urgency of his mission. His form shimmered, feathers receding, body reshaping. In the place of the raven stood a young man, naked and smudged with dirt, but with the same sharp, intelligent eyes. The speaker recoiled, a gasp catching in his throat. He reached for a walking staff, leaning against a post, his knuckles white. "Do not be afraid, grandfather," Yale said, his human voice rough from disuse. He pointed to the box. "I bring you a gift, a story that is not yet a story." The speaker did not lower his staff, but his gaze shifted from Yale's face to the box. "Shapeshifter, trickster, what mischief do you bring to my house in the dark?" "Not mischief," Yale said. "Hope." He knelt before the box. His heart was pounding. This was the moment of truth. Would they understand? Would they see? He reached out and, with a deliberate slowness, he lifted the lid. The effect was instantaneous and breathtaking. A torrent of golden light exploded from the box, flooding the longhouse. It was not the gentle silver of the moon, but the vibrant, life-giving radiance of the sun. The dim red embers of the fire were utterly vanquished, rendered pathetic and irrelevant. The light leaped and danced, illuminating every corner of the vast space. It gleamed on the polished surfaces of bent wood boxes. It lit up the rich reds and blacks of the woven blankets. It caught the subtle curves of the carved crests on the house posts, making the figures of raven and eagle seem to stir with life. The village speaker cried out, throwing a hand over his eyes. The light was too bright, too pure, too alien. But after a moment, he slowly, tremblingly lowered his hand.
He stared into the heart of the light, his ancient face transfigured. The deep-set sorrow in his eyes was burned away, replaced by an awe so profound it was akin to terror and ecstasy combined. Tears, glistening in the brilliant light, began to stream down the deep grooves of his cheeks. He was not the only one. The light and the commotion had awakened others in the longhouse. Men, women, and children sat up on their platforms, their faces etched with shock and wonder. They shielded their eyes, then slowly uncovered them, drawn irresistibly to the source of the miracle. A child pointed a tiny finger and laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that had not been heard in the village for generations. "The sun," the village speaker whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. He looked from the glowing box to Yale. You are the one from the stories. The thief. You have done it." "I have stolen it," Yale confirmed, his own voice thick with feeling. "But the theft is not complete. It is trapped here, in this box, in this lodge. It belongs to all. It belongs in the sky." He explained quickly, telling the old man of Nagun's wrath, of the council of beings, of the plan to take the sun to the highest mountain and release it. He spoke of the need for their help, for their swift canoes to carry him down the coast. The speaker listened, his eyes never leaving Yale's face. When the story was done, he was silent for a long time, his gaze returning to the sun, its light reflecting in his tear-filled eyes. Then he stood up, his frail body suddenly radiating a formidable authority. He turned to his people, who were all watching, their faces a mixture of fear, hope, and blazing excitement. "The stories are true," the speaker's voice rang out, strong and clear, filling the longhouse. "The great trickster has come to us. He has brought the dawn in a box. Our long night of gray is ending. We must help him. We must help ourselves." A sound rose from the people, a collective intake of breath that became a murmur, then a shout of agreement. The listless despair that had gripped them for so long was shattered, replaced by a galvanizing purpose. The gift of fire had been given not to warm their bodies, but to ignite their spirits. The alliance was forged. The journey to the roof of the world would begin at first light. The canoes of dawn. The village, which for generations had slumbered in the gray gloom, erupted into a frenzy of purposeful activity. The revelation of the sun, a living, breathing fire contained within a simple box, had acted like a lightning strike to the heart of the community. The listless air was gone, burned away by the golden light that had flooded the speaker's longhouse. Now that light was hidden again, the box wrapped in the softest otter fur and held securely by the speaker himself. But its memory blazed in every eye. Yale, having resumed his raven form to conserve his strength and maintain the element of surprise, watched from the crossbeam of a longhouse. His injured wing ached with a dull, persistent throb, but the sight below was a potent medicine. Men, their muscles bunching with renewed vigor, hauled the great sea-going canoes from their resting places on the beach into the cold, lapping water. These were not the small river canoes, but the massive, elegant nunumai, hewn from single, colossal red cedars, their prows carved into the graceful forms of wolves and orcas. They were vessels built to challenge the open ocean. The women prepared supplies with a swift, efficient rhythm. They packed tight-woven baskets with dried salmon, strips of venison, and cakes of rendered eulachon oil. They filled water skins from the fresh stream and gathered bundles of carefully selected cedar bark kindling.
The very air crackled with an energy that had been absent for centuries, the electric thrill of a people embarking on a sacred mission, a voyage that would redefine their world. The village speaker moved among his people, his voice a steady, commanding presence. He directed the loading of the canoes, ensuring the weight was distributed perfectly for the journey. He spoke with the senior paddlers, men whose knowledge of the tides, currents, and hidden reefs was etched into the lines of their faces. The plan was simple, yet perilous. They would follow the coastline south, using the canoes to cover the great distance that Yale, in his injured state, could not fly. Their destination was the solitary mountain that pierced the clouds at the edge of the sea, the place the people called Ki-ya, the pillar of the sky. Yale felt a profound and unfamiliar emotion swell within his chest. It was a sense of belonging, of shared purpose. He had always been an observer, a clever outsider looking in.
Now, he was the catalyst, the reason for this unified effort. The weight of their hope was immense, a responsibility that settled on his shoulders heavier than any physical burden. Al-alayhi salam, the first hint of a lighter gray touched the eastern horizon. The fleet was ready. 4 great canoes, each manned by a dozen strong paddlers, sat low in the water, their carved prows pointing south. The village speaker stood at the prow of the lead canoe, the otter fur bundle containing the sun held tight against his chest. Yale launched himself from his perch, his flight a clumsy, lopsided arc that ended with him settling onto the raised stern of the same canoe, next to the steersman. A hush fell over the village. Those remaining on the shore, the very young, the very old, gathered at the water's edge. Their faces were not sad, but filled with a fierce, burning pride. The speaker raised a hand in a silent blessing. Then he gave a single sharp nod. The steersman, a man with arms thick from a lifetime of commanding the sea, thrust his long, carved paddle into the water. The command was echoed by the lead paddlers in the other canoes. In perfect, synchronized unison, dozens of paddles dipped into the gray, choppy water. The canoes, which had seemed so heavy on land, slid forward with a powerful, graceful momentum, cutting through the waves like knives. The journey had begun. The rhythmic sound of the paddles, the dip, the pull, the lift, became the heartbeat of the mission. Swish-thump, swish-thump. It was a sound of immense human effort, a determined counter-rhythm to the sighing wind and the crashing waves. The paddlers began a low, guttural chant, a song to give their muscles strength and to honor the ocean that granted them passage. The words spoke of the salmon's determination, the whale's power, the eagle's far sight. It was a song of petition and of promise. Yale watched the rugged coastline slide past. The dark, brooding shapes of the forest gave way to sheer cliffs where seabirds nested in countless numbers, their cacophonous cries a constant soundtrack. Sallallahu wasallam sea stacks, great towers of rock standing sentinel in the surf, worn into strange shapes by the relentless ocean. The mist clung to everything, but today it felt different. It was no longer a shroud of despair, but a veil of mystery, soon to be lifted. He looked at the faces of the paddlers. Their expressions were set in masks of concentration, their bodies working in flawless harmony. Sweat gleamed on their brows and backs despite the chill. They were not just transporting a bird and a box, they were escorting the dawn itself. The speaker stood immobile at the prow, his eyes fixed on the southern horizon, a living figurehead guiding them toward destiny. Hours passed. The gray light did not change, but the landscape did. The coastline became more dramatic, the mountains plunging directly into the sea. The water grew deeper, a colder, more profound shade of leaden green.
Great floating islands of kelp drifted past, their long leathery fronds waving like the hair of sea monsters just below the surface. Suddenly, a shout came from one of the following canoes. A paddler was pointing towards the north, his face etched with alarm. Yale turned, his heart seizing. The northern sky, which had been a uniform gray, was now a churning cauldron of darkness. Black clouds, shot through with flashes of silent lightning, were boiling on the horizon, moving with an unnatural speed. Nagun's wrath had found them. The distraction of the crows had not been enough, or the pull of the sun was too strong. The steersman grunted, his grip tightening on his paddle. "He comes." The village speaker did not turn. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and carried over the sound of the waves and the paddles. "He is too late. The crows have given us our start. Now we race. Paddle harder. Sing louder. The sky is angry, but the sea is with us." A new energy, born of fear and defiance, surged through the paddlers. Their chant grew louder, more forceful. The paddles dug deeper, pulling the canoes through the water with renewed urgency. The canoes of dawn were no longer just traveling. They were fleeing, chased by the gathering storm of a god's vengeance. The race for the roof of the world had become a desperate sprint for the future of light itself. The chase upon the waves. The pursuing storm was a living entity, a wall of concentrated fury that devoured the horizon. The relatively calm sea began to churn, the waves building from choppy swells into steep, foam-crested mountains. A cold, preternatural wind screamed down from the north, tearing at the paddlers' clothing and whipping the sea into a frenzy. The first drops of rain began to fall. Not water, but a stinging pellets of ice. The canoes, once so graceful, now became tiny, vulnerable shells tossed upon a heaving, lead-gray plain. The synchronized rhythm of the paddlers was broken, replaced by a frantic, battling struggle to keep the vessels upright and pointed forward. Icy water sloshed over the gunwales, soaking the occupants and their precious supplies. The steersman in Yale's canoe fought the massive steering paddle, his muscles corded with the strain, his face a mask of grim determination. Yale clung to the stern, his claws digging into the wet wood. His injured wing was an agony of protest with every violent lurch of the canoe. He could feel Nagun's presence in the storm, a cold, focused hatred that permeated the very air. This was not the blind rage of nature. This was a targeted assault. The old man of the sky wanted his son back, and he would scourge the sea and shatter the land to get it. A massive wave, darker than the others, loomed over the lead canoe. It was a wall of water set to crush them. The paddlers saw it coming. A cry of terror went up. The speaker, still clutching the sunbox, braced himself against the prow. "Hold fast!" the steersman roared, his voice nearly lost in the howl of the wind. Yale knew they would not survive the wave. In that moment of supreme crisis, his trickster nature, honed by a lifetime of solving problems, took over. He could not fight the storm, but he could deceive it. He launched himself into the air, his flight a desperate, wobbly scramble. He flew not away from the wave, but towards it, a single black speck against the towering wall of water. Alayhi salam, he flew. He began to change. He focused his will not on his own form, but on the air around him, on the water itself. He poured his energy into creating an illusion, a glamour of immense scale. He projected an image, a perfect, shimmering replica of the lead canoe, complete with paddlers and the village speaker holding the glowing sunbox. But this phantom canoe was not heading south. It peeled away to the east, racing across the tops of the waves towards a narrow, rock-strewn inlet. The effect was instantaneous. The sentient storm, its attention fixed on the signature of the sun, hesitated. The colossal wave paused, its crest trembling. The storm's fury split. The main body of the black clouds and lashing wind continued to pursue the real canoes, but a significant part of its energy, the intelligent hunting part, veered sharply to chase the illusory decoy. The real canoe, freed from the direct onslaught of that particular wave, rode up the steep face of a smaller swell and crashed down the other side, drenched but intact. The paddlers, gasping and shaking, saw Lala Aliwasalam, the phantom canoe, leading a portion of the storm away towards certain destruction on the rocks. They looked at the raven, who was now fluttering back to the stern, utterly spent, his feathers plastered to his body. They did not cheer. There was no time. But a new, fierce respect burned in their eyes. The trickster was not just a thief. He was a protector, a warrior who fought with guile and illusion. The storm, though divided, was still a formidable foe. The wind and waves continued to batter them. The world was a chaos of water and noise. The paddlers, their strength sapped, fought on, their chant now a raw, wordless cry of endurance. They were no longer just men. They were elements themselves, their will to survive forged into an unbreakable force. Hours bled together in a nightmare of exertion and terror. Just when it seemed their strength would fail completely, the steersman shouted, his voice cracking with exhaustion and hope. "There, the pillar!" Through the driving rain and spray, a shape emerged from the gloom. It was Kia, the mountain. It rose from the edge of the sea, a colossal pyramid of black rock, its upper third lost in the low, swirling clouds. It was immense, ancient, and utterly forbidding. Its cliffs were sheer, its slopes a treacherous jumble of scree and ice. But it was their destination. It was salvation. The sight of the mountain gave the paddlers a final, desperate reserve of strength. They drove the canoes through the last 100 yards of churning surf towards a small, protected cove at the base of the great mountain. As the canoes scraped onto the stony beach, the men stumbled out, collapsing onto the rocks, their bodies trembling with fatigue. The storm, cheated of its prey on the water, now gathered itself at the base of the mountain. The black clouds swirled around the lower slopes, and the wind howled with renewed fury, as if Nagan was vowing that they would not climb, that the sun would never leave this place. Yale looked from the exhausted humans on the beach to the towering, impassive mountain above, and then to the raging storm that encircled it. The sea journey was over. The final, most arduous ascent was about to begin. The sun was so close, yet the path to the sky was guarded by the full, focused wrath of a god. The ascent of the pillar. The cove offered a temporary, fragile respite. The towering cliffs of Kia shielded them from the worst of the wind, but the air still vibrated with the storm's frustrated roar. The paddlers lay where they had collapsed, their chests heaving, their muscles spent. The village speaker, however, was on his feet. The otter fur bundle was still pressed to his chest, and his eyes, though shadowed with exhaustion, were fixed on the mountain that loomed above them. The path ahead was not a path at all. It was a near vertical face of wet, black rock, streaked with veins of white quartz that gleamed dully in the stormlight. Waterfalls, born from the rain and the melting ice high above, cascaded down the cliffs, sending a constant misty spray over everything. The lower slopes were a treacherous moraine of loose, sharp stones that shifted and slid underfoot. They could not rest for long.
The storm was a living siege, and Nagun's attention was now concentrated solely on this mountain. Every moment they delayed was a moment the god could muster his power against them. The speaker turned to his people. His voice was hoarse, but it carried the unshakable authority of his office. "We have crossed the angry sea. The raven has tricked the storm itself. Now we must climb. Our legs must be our paddles. Our hands must be our strength. We carry the dawn up this rock. Who will come with me?" Slowly, painfully, the men began to rise. Their bodies were broken, but their spirits, ignited by the sun's glimpse and tempered by the harrowing sea chase, were unbroken. A dozen of the strongest, including the steersman, stepped forward. The others would remain to guard the canoes and prepare a signal fire, a beacon of hope or a pyre of failure. Yale, his own body a symphony of pain, knew he could not make the climb in his current state. His injured wing was a dead weight. He would have to transform again. With a concentrated effort, he shifted back into his human form, the young man who had stood in the longhouse. The transition was jarring, and he stumbled, his legs weak. The steersman caught his arm, his grip firm and steady. "We will help you, Raven," the man grunted. "You carry the hope. We will carry you if we must." The ascent began. It was a brutal, grueling process that made the sea journey seem like a gentle paddle. The climbers moved in a single, cautious line, the speaker at the front, picking the least impossible route. They scrambled up the scree slopes, sending showers of rocks clattering down behind them. They clung to narrow ledges, their fingers numb with cold and strain. Their bodies pressed against the wet stone, while the wind plucked at them trying to pry them loose. Yale moved in the middle of the line, aided by the strong hands of the steersman behind him. Every muscle in his legs burned. The thin, cold air seared his lungs. The world narrowed to the next handhold, the next foothold. The roar of the storm was a constant, deafening presence, a reminder that the god of the sky was fighting them for every inch of altitude. They came to a dead end, a smooth, overhanging cliff with no visible way up. The waterfalls poured over this lip, creating a curtain of water that hid the rock behind them. The party halted, despair beginning to creep into their exhausted minds. It was then that Yale, his trickster's perception, seeing what others did not, noticed a pattern. The waterfall did not fall in a solid sheet. There was a rhythm to it, a slight parting of the cascade every few seconds, revealing a narrow, dark fissure behind the water. "There!" he shouted over the wind, pointing. "Behind the water, a crack!" When the waterfall parted again, the steersman Salala did it. He was the strongest. Taking a deep breath, he timed the cascade, and when it momentarily thinned, he leaped across the gap, his fingers finding purchase in the crack. He hauled himself into the fissure, disappearing behind the roaring curtain of water. A moment later, a strong woven cedar bark rope, one they had brought for this purpose, was tossed back out. One by one, the climbers pulled themselves across the gap and into the relative silence of the tunnel behind the waterfall. They were inside the mountain. The tunnel was narrow and dark, but it sloped upward, offering shelter from the storm and a clear, if arduous, path. They drank from the water running down the walls and pressed on, their way now lit by a few carefully guarded lumps of resinous fatwood they ignited with a sparkstone. For hours they climbed in the dark, the only sounds their labored breathing and the scuff of their feet on stone. The tunnel twisted and turned, sometimes opening into vast, echoing caverns hung with stone icicles, other times narrowing to a crack they had to squeeze through. Finally, they saw a light ahead. It was not the golden light of the sun, but the familiar, feeble gray of the outside world.
They had reached the summit. They scrambled the last few yards and emerged, blinking, onto a small, windswept plateau. They stood at the roof of the world. The summit of Kiya was a flat, barren expanse of rock, scoured clean by the eternal wind. Below them, the storm raged, a boiling sea of black cloud that obscured the land and the ocean. They were above it all. Here, the air was thin and freezing, and the silence was profound, broken only by the whistle of the high-altitude wind. The village speaker, his body trembling with exhaustion and cold, unwrapped the otter fur bundle. He held out the small cedarwood box to Yale. His eyes met the trickster's, and in that look, centuries of human longing were passed from one to the other.
"It is time," the speaker said, his voice a reverent whisper. "The sky is waiting." Yale took the box. It was warm, almost hot against his skin. He could feel the living entity within, straining for release. He held the hope of the world in his hands. He walked to the very edge of the summit, where the rock fell away into the abyss of clouds. The final act, the great release, was upon him. The liberation of the sun. Yale stood at the precipice of the world, the wind tearing at his human form's clothing, a cold so profound it felt like the air itself was turning to glass in his lungs. The small cedar wood box in his hands was no longer just warm. It was pulsing with a frantic, contained energy, a heartbeat of pure light screaming to be free. Below his feet, the storm of Nagun's fury churned, a sea of black cloud and silent lightning, the last desperate barrier between the stolen light and its rightful home. He looked back at the huddled forms of the village speaker and the climbers. Their faces were pale with exhaustion and cold, but their eyes were fixed on him with an absolute, unwavering faith. They had crossed an angry ocean and scaled an impossible mountain. They had placed their lives, their entire world, in his hands. The weight of that trust was heavier than the mountain itself. He turned his gaze to the box. This was the moment. Every clever trick, every endured hardship, every alliance forged had led to this single defining action. He was no longer just a thief. He was a midwife to the dawn. He took a deep breath, the thin air offering little sustenance. He focused his will, not on deception or illusion this time, but on release. He poured his intention into the box, not to keep it closed, but to shatter its captivity. He envisioned the sky not as a possession of a greedy god, but as a vast, empty bowl waiting to be filled with fire. With a cry that was part effort, part triumph, and part fear, he thrust the box upwards and threw back the lid. There was no sound. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, a sliver of gold escaped the confines of the box. It was hesitant at first, a thread of light. Then, it erupted. The sun did not simply emerge, it unfolded. It was a being of incandescent plasma, a living sphere of fire that had been compressed into an impossible smallness. It swelled, growing from the size of a fist to the size of a house, to the size of the world, its light an absolute, annihilating whiteness. The force of its release was a silent, concussive wave that threw Yale and the men behind him onto their backs. The gray world vanished. The light was a physical blow, a golden hammer that smashed the perpetual twilight to splinters. It flooded the summit, so intense it was painful, searing their dark, accustomed eyes. The black storm clouds below were not merely illuminated, they were vaporized. The darkness and the fury of Nagun were burned away in an instant, replaced by a clear, impossible, brilliant blue. The sky, for the first time in living memory, was blue.
Yale, shielding his eyes with a trembling arm, stared upward. The sun hung in the eastern part of that blue expanse, a perfect blazing disk. Its warmth was immediate and shocking. It fell upon his skin, a sensation so alien and so profoundly right that tears streamed down his face, evaporating almost instantly in the new, dry heat. The cold that had been a constant companion since his birth was banished. The very rock beneath him began to steam as the moisture on its surface evaporated. He looked at the men around him. They were weeping, laughing, holding their hands up to the sky as if to catch the light in their palms. The village speaker was on his knees, his face turned to the sun, his mouth open in a silent hymn of gratitude. The deep, chronic sorrow that had lined his face for a lifetime was gone, replaced by a radiance that mirrored the celestial body above. Then Yale looked down. The world below was being reborn. The ocean was no longer a leaden gray, but a vibrant, sparkling tapestry of sapphire and emerald. The forests were not a monotone dark green, but a million shades of jade, lime, and pine, each tree casting a sharp, distinct shadow, a thing that had never existed before. The snow on the distant peaks was blindingly white. Colors, true and vibrant colors, exploded into existence everywhere. The world was not just lit, it was revealed in all its hidden, glorious complexity. The liberation was not just visual. The very air tasted different. It was warmer, carrying the rich scent of sun-warmed pine and damp earth. The sound of the wind changed from a mournful sigh to a lively whisper. From far below, they heard a new sound, the joyous, echoing cries of eagles, the chattering of squirrels, the roar of a bear, a chorus of life greeting the first morning. The sun began to move. Slowly, majestically, it climbed higher in its blue domain, painting a path of gold across the water. It was free. It was where it belonged. The long, gray age was over. The age of light had begun. But as the sun climbed, a shadow fell over Yale's heart. He had accomplished the impossible. He had brought the sun to the world. But he had also made himself the primary target of a god whose greatest treasure was now lost forever. The joy of creation was instantly tempered by the cold certainty of retribution. He had won the battle for the sky, but the war with the old man was far from over. The withering gaze. The celebration on the mountaintop was brief, cut short by a new and terrible development. The warmth of the sun, so welcome and life-giving at first, began to intensify. It was no longer a comforting embrace, it became a searing glare. The brilliant blue of the sky began to pale, bleached by the sun's unrestrained fury. The pleasant heat transformed into a desiccating, oppressive weight. The sun, after its long imprisonment, did not know its own strength. It had been released, but without its balancing counterparts, the moon and the stars, its energy was raw, untempered, and absolute. There was no cycle, only an endless burning day. Yale felt it first. The skin on his arms, so recently thrilled by the novel sensation of warmth, began to redden and prickle with pain. The men around him groaned, covering their heads. The snow and ice that clung to the higher crevices of the summit began to melt with an audible hiss, sending small streams of water trickling over the rocks, which quickly evaporated into steam. "It burns!" one of the climbers cried out, scrambling to find a sliver of shade behind a rock. There was no shade. The sun was directly overhead, a merciless, glaring eye. The village speaker looked at Yale, his euphoria replaced by alarm. "Raven, this light, it is a fire! It will scorch the world!" Yale stared at the sun, his eyes slitted against the painful intensity. He had been so focused on the act of liberation, he had not considered the consequence of imbalance.
He had stolen a creator's tool without understanding its full nature. In his zeal to end the gray, he had unleashed a tyrant of light. This was Nagun's revenge. This was the god's final, cruel trick. He had not been able to prevent the sun's release, so he had withdrawn his moderating influence. He was allowing the sun to run wild, to prove that the world was better off in the peaceful, cool gray than under the withering gaze of an unopposed star. Below, the effects would be catastrophic. The vibrant green of the forest would soon turn brown. The streams would run dry. The salmon would die in warming rivers. The people who had celebrated the dawn would now hide from the relentless, scorching day. His quest was incomplete. He had brought light, but he had not brought balance. The world needed the gentle, cooling light of the moon to soothe the sun's fierce heat. It needed the quiet, hopeful pinpricks of the stars to define the night and give the world rest. A new, more daunting purpose solidified within him. He had to go back. He had to return to the lodge of the old man of the sky and steal the remaining 2 boxes. The moon and the stars were not mere ornaments. They were essential counterweights, the regulators of the cosmic order he had just shattered. He turned to the speaker, his expression grim. "The sun is alone," he said, his voice raspy from the dry air. "It needs its family. It needs the night to give meaning to the day. I was wrong to think one light was enough." The speaker understood immediately. The fear in his eyes was replaced by a weary, resolute acceptance. "You must get the others." Yale nodded. He looked up at the punishing sun, then towards the north, towards the hidden lodge. The journey would be even more dangerous now. Nagun's wrath would be absolute. The land would be transformed, its familiar gray landmarks lost in the harsh new light. And he was exhausted, his body battered, his spirit tested to its limit. But he had no choice. He had created this problem, and he alone could solve it. "I will go," Yale said, "but I cannot go as I am." His human form was weak, vulnerable to the elements and to detection. He needed the speed and cunning of the raven, but his wing was still injured. He looked at the men, at their strong, capable bodies. An idea born of sheer desperation came to him. It was a magic he had never attempted, a deeper sharing of his trickster nature. "I need your strength," he said to the steersman, the man who had saved him on the cliff. "Not to carry me, but to become me." The steersman looked confused, but he did not hesitate. He trusted the raven. "What must I do?" Yale approached him. "Give me your hand." The steersman held out his large, calloused hand. Yale took it. He closed his eyes, focusing not on changing himself, but on transferring the essence of his raven form, the potential for flight and feather, into the willing human. He felt a part of his own life force, his magical core, flow out of him and into the steersman. The man gasped. His body began to shimmer and contort. His form shrank, his skin darkening, becoming covered in sleek black feathers. In moments where the steersman had stood, there was now a second raven, a powerful, healthy bird, its wings strong and whole, its eyes holding the man's steadfast courage within the raven's clever gaze. Yale, meanwhile, felt a profound weakness wash over him. The transfer had cost him dearly. He had given away a piece of his own power to create an ally. He looked at the new raven, a brother in form and purpose. "You will be my wings," Yale said to him, his own voice now a weak croak. "We will fly north together. You will carry my strength, and I will carry the plan." The 2 ravens, one battered and determined, the other newly formed and powerful, looked towards the north. The sun beat down upon them, a harsh reminder of the urgent need for the moon. The second half of the great theft was about to begin. The world had its day. Now it needed its night. The return to the Lodge of Shadows. The flight north was a journey through an alien world. The familiar, soft-edged gray was gone, replaced by a landscape of stark contrasts and brutal clarity. The sun, positioned high in the bleached blue sky, cast shadows so sharp and black they looked like cuts in the earth. The forests, seen from above, were a searing, intense green that hurt the eyes. The rivers and lakes glittered like scattered shards of glass. The beauty was undeniable, but it was a harsh, demanding beauty, devoid of softness or mystery. Yale, flying beside his new companion, felt the strain immediately. His injured wing, coupled with the energy he had sacrificed to create the second raven, made every flap a struggle. He lagged behind, his flight erratic and labored. The other raven, whom Yale had come to think of as Ka, the strength, would circle back, his strong wings beating a steady, patient rhythm, urging Yale onward. They saw the evidence of the sun's wrath below. In the open tundra, small ponds had already shrunk, leaving rings of white mineral deposit around their edges. The moss, usually lush and damp, was turning brittle and brown. The world was parching under the unrelenting gaze. This sight fueled Yale's determination. He had to succeed. He had to bring balance. Along they flew. Yale taught Ka the ways of the trickster. He showed him how to read the thermal currents, not just for lift, but for the stories they carried. The scent of a distant fire, the moisture of a hidden stream. He taught him the language of the land, the subtle signs that spoke of hidden dangers and safe passages. Ka learned quickly, his human intelligence merging with his new raven instincts to create a formidable pupil. After days of arduous flight, the land began to rise into the familiar, jagged peaks of the north. The air grew thin and cold once more, a relief from the searing heat of the lowlands. And there, at the edge of the world, they saw it again, the lodge of the Old Man of the Sky. It looked different in the sun's light. The petrified wood and obsidian gleamed, no longer shrouded in gloom. But the lodge itself seemed to hunch in on itself, a dark, brooding presence radiating a palpable aura of grief and rage. The rhythmic pulse that had once emanated from within was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. The hide curtain over the entrance was drawn tight. Nagoon knew they were coming. The lodge was a fortress awaiting a siege. They landed on the same rocky outcrop Yale had used on his first approach. The plan was simple, a variation on his original deception, but refined by experience and now executed by a team. "Remember," Yale croaked to Ka, his voice weak, "you are the distraction. You are the obvious threat. Be loud, be bold, draw his eye. I will be the silence that slips past it." Ka nodded, his black eyes gleaming. He understood his role perfectly. He launched himself into the air, not with stealth, but with a defiant, noisy flapping of wings. He flew straight towards the lodge, circling above it, letting out a series of loud, challenging caws. "Old man," he cried out, his voice echoing against the stone, "your house is dark. Have you lost something? The world is bright now. It has a new master." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the hide curtain was flung aside with such force it tore. Nagoon stood in the doorway. He seemed to have aged millennia. His stormy eyes were sunken in his head, burning with a cold, exhausted hatred. His white hair and beard were wild and unkempt.
He looked not like a powerful god, but like a bereaved king whose entire kingdom had been stolen. He saw Ka circling above. His lips peeled back from his teeth in a snarl.
"Thief!" he hissed, the word carrying less thunderous power than before, but infused with a more personal, more venomous hatred. He raised a hand, and a spear of solid ice formed from the moisture in the air, shooting towards Ka with deadly accuracy. Ka, with his strong, healthy wings, banked sharply, dodging the spear. He continued his taunting flight, leading Nagun's gaze away from the lodge, towards the high peaks. "You are slow, old man. The world moves on without you." While the confrontation unfolded in the sky, Yale made his move. He did not fly. He hopped and scrambled, using every rock and crevice for cover, a tiny soot-black shadow moving with agonizing slowness across the ground. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to hurry, but he forced himself to be patient, to be a part of the landscape. He reached the side of the lodge, pressing his body against the cold, rough stone. He could hear Nagun's roared challenges and Ka's defiant caws from the other side. The entrance was unguarded. The god's entire attention was fixed on the noisy, brazen raven in the sky. Taking a deep breath, Yale slipped inside. The interior of the lodge was transformed. The blue fire was extinguished, leaving the space in a deep, cold gloom. The shelves were empty, save for the two remaining boxes, the polished argillite box of the moon and the plain ironwood box of the stars. They sat alone on the rock shelf, looking small and forlorn in the vast, dark space. The air was thick with the scent of despair. Yale did not hesitate. He went straight to the shelf. The argillite box was cool to the touch, its surface smooth and mysterious. The stars box hummed with a faint cosmic energy. He could not carry both. He had to choose. The moon was the immediate need, the balm for the sun's fire. He focused his will on the moon box, shrinking it as he had the sun box. It condensed in his claws, becoming a small, dark stone that seemed to drink the faint light in the lodge. He clutched it tight. A shadow fell over the entrance. Nagun was returning. Ka had led him on a chase, but the god was coming back to his sanctuary. Yale turned to flee, but his injured wing betrayed him. He stumbled, his claw scraping against the stone floor. The sound was tiny, but in the silent lodge, it was a gunshot. Nagun froze in the doorway. His stormy eyes, sweeping the dark interior, locked onto Yale. The recognition, the sheer magnitude of the betrayal dawned on his face. The first raven, the one he had taken in, the one he had, in his own twisted way, cared for, was back, stealing from him again. A sound came from the goon's throat, a low, wounded animal noise of pure, undiluted agony. It was the sound of a heart breaking with the force of a collapsing star. "You," he whispered, the word filled with a bottomless grief that was more terrifying than any rage. Yale swallowed the chance. In that moment of the god's paralyzing sorrow, he bolted. He scrambled between Nagun's legs, out of the lodge and into the open air. He screamed a single sharp caw, the signal for Ka. The two ravens, one clutching the stolen moon, the other providing cover, fled south. They had what they came for. But as they flew, Yale could not shake the image of Nagun's face. Not angry, but utterly, devastatingly broken. He had stolen the light, and in doing so, he had shattered the spirit of the sky. The victory felt hollow, tainted by a sorrow he had never anticipated. The Silver Balm. The two ravens flew south, a desperate black arrow against the hard, ceramic blue of the sky. Behind them, the lodge of the old man was a diminishing speck of shadow, but the echo of his shattered silence felt like a physical force pursuing them. Yale, the stolen moonbox clutched tight in his claw, flew with a frantic, pained energy, his injured wings screaming in protest. Ka flew close beside him, a protective presence, his strong wings beating a steady, reassuring rhythm. The world below them was suffering. The unrelenting sun had baked the color from the land. The vibrant greens of the forest were fading to a dusty, tired olive. The veins of rivers and streams showed more exposed rock and gravel, their waters running low and warm. From their great height, they could see patches of brown, wilted foliage where the most delicate plants had already surrendered to the heat. The brilliant, harsh beauty of the first day was curdling into a landscape of thirst. Yale's heart ached with a new kind of guilt. He had seen the consequence of his actions in Nagun's grief-stricken eyes, and now he saw it written across the face of the world. He had traded a gray prison for a golden desert. The urgency to release the moon, to provide relief, was a fire in his own breast. They did not fly all the way back to the pillar of the sky. The world was large, and the need was universal. They needed a place of significance, a high point from which the moon's soothing light could spread its influence across the land. Yale remembered a place from his youth, a high, solitary mountain that stood deep in the coastal range, its peak often cradling the low clouds. It was a place of quiet power, far from the sea, but central to the land. Their flight was a race against the sun's relentless decay. They saw animals seeking shelter, panting in the shade of rocks that offered little respite. The air itself felt thin and used, devoid of its former vitality. The very world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for a deliverance that only they carried. Finally, the mountain came into view. It was a majestic granite dome, its summit scraped clean by wind and time. They landed on its peak, the stone hot beneath their claws. The sun was beginning its descent in the west, but its light was still fierce. The heat it had built up over the day radiating from the rock in visible shimmers. There was no ceremony this time, no audience of hopeful humans. This was a quieter, more solemn act, a necessary correction to a cosmic error. Yale placed the cool, dark argillite box on the flat stone before him. He looked at Ka, who gave a single, solemn nod. The moment had come. With a reverence born of hard-earned understanding, Yale used his beak to pry open the lid of the box. There was no explosive eruption of force. The moon emerged with a sigh. A soft, luminous silver mist poured from the container, coiling and swirling in the air above the summit like a living creature tasting its freedom. The mist coalesced, gathering itself into a perfect, luminous sphere. The moon. It was smaller and cooler than the sun, its light a gentle, penetrating radiance that did not assault the senses, but soothed them. Where the sun's light was a shout, the moon's was a whisper. Its silver glow flowed over the mountain peak, a visible wave of coolness. The harsh, sharp-edged shadows cast by the setting sun softened, their outlines blurring into a gentle gradation of twilight. The oppressive heat that had weighed upon the mountain began to lift, replaced by a refreshing, cool breeze that seemed to originate from the moon itself. Yale and Ka watched, mesmerized, as the moon began to climb into the eastern part of the sky, opposite the dying sun. Its ascent was serene, a quiet counterpoint to the sun's blazing drama. As it rose, its light spread across the land, painting the wilting forests in shades of silver and charcoal, turning the rivers into ribbons of quicksilver.
The effect on the world was immediate and profound. The creatures that had hidden from the sun's wrath began to emerge. An owl hooted from a nearby grove of trees, its call a confident declaration of the coming night. The chirping of crickets, a sound that had been absent, rose in a hesitant, then confident chorus. The world, which had been braced against the heat, seemed to exhale a collective, grateful sigh. But the most significant change was in the sky itself. The sun, now touching the western horizon, seemed to acknowledge its sister. Its fierce white-gold light mellowed into deep hues of orange, rose, and violet, colors that had never before been seen. The first sunset was a spectacle of breathtaking beauty, a silent truce between day and night. The sun dipped below the horizon, and for the first time, true darkness began to fall.
Yet, it was not the terrifying, absolute darkness of a lightless world. It was a gentle, velvety darkness, illuminated by the steady, calming presence of the moon. The world was not plunged into nothingness. It was embraced by a different kind of light, a light of dreams and reflection. Yale felt a profound peace settle over him. The moon's light was a balm on his own spirit, cooling the fever of guilt and urgency that had driven him. He had not just brought a second light, he had brought rhythm. He had brought the promise of rest, of coolness, of a time for the world to recover from the day's exertions. He looked at the moon, its familiar, marbled face serene in the vast, darkening sky. The first day had been a birth, violent and shocking. The first night was a lullaby, gentle and restorative. The great thief had not just stolen lights, he had stolen time itself and woven it into a cycle. The world now had a heartbeat, the strong, steady pulse of the sun, and the quiet, restorative rhythm of the moon. The scattering of infinite jewels. The peace of the moonlit night was deep, but for Yale it was incomplete. He sat on the mountain peak beside Ka, the two ravens silhouetted against the vast, silver-drenched landscape. The world was beautiful in its new, bi-colored reality, but the sky above felt empty. The deep, velvety blackness between the moon and the horizon was an abyss, a void that seemed to swallow the moon's gentle light at its edges. It was a canvas waiting for its final, most intricate brushstrokes. The stars. He had left them behind. The memory of the plain ironwood box hummed in his mind. He had felt the countless points of cold fire within it, a contained universe of potential. Without them, the night sky was a lonely place. It lacked the context, the depth, the sense of infinite possibility that only a field of stars could provide. The moon was a solitary queen. She needed her court of glittering nobles. Ka shifted beside him, his head tilted as he observed the dark expanse. He did not need to speak. His questioning gaze said everything. What now? Yale felt the weight of his final task. The journey back to Noggin's lodge would be the most perilous yet. The old man's grief would have curdled into a permanent, vigilant hatred. His sanctum had been violated twice. It would be a fortress of traps and despair. To steal the stars would be to take the last remaining piece of the god's identity, to leave him with nothing but a hollow, silent lodge. But the world was not yet whole. The humans, in their stories, spoke of the stars as the eyes of the ancestors, us guides for travelers, us the source of myths and legends. They were not just lights, they were stories. They were hope etched in the ceiling of the world. "The sky is not finished," Yale croaked, his voice soft in the quiet night. "It lacks its stories." Ka gave a low, understanding caw. He was ready.
Their third flight north was undertaken in the cool of the night, under the benevolent gaze of the moon he had just freed. The world below was transformed yet again. The moon's silver light revealed a landscape of soft mysteries and deep shadows, a stark contrast to the sun's revealing glare. It was a world meant for secrets and dreams. They flew over human villages. They saw people gathered outside their longhouses, their faces turned not just to the moon, but to the dark sky around it, their expressions a mixture of wonder and a nascent, unformed longing. They felt the incompleteness, too. When the familiar, jagged peaks of the far north appeared on the horizon, a deep dread settled in Yale's heart. The lodge was there, a darker blot against the moonlit snow. No light came from within, no sound. It was a tomb. They landed on their usual outcrop. The plan was simple because no complex trickery would work a third time. This would be a test of speed, of sheer audacity, and of sacrifice. "He will be waiting," Yale said. "He will be focused on the entrance, on the interior. He will not be looking up." Ka understood. His role was to be the diversion, but this time it was a role of pure, selfless danger. He would draw Nagoon's full, undivided attention, giving Yale a single, fleeting moment. Without another sound, Ka launched himself. He did not circle or taunt. He flew straight at the lodge's entrance, a black missile in the moonlight. He hit the heavy hide curtain with a solid thud, tearing through it and into the lodge's dark interior. Instantly, a roar of pure, unadulterated fury shattered the night's silence. The very mountain shook. Blue light, cold and malevolent, flared from within the lodge. Now, Yale launched himself upward, not towards the entrance, but towards the roof of the lodge. He flew to the smoke hole, a small opening at the peak of the structure.
It was a tight fit, but he squeezed through, tumbling down into the absolute darkness inside. The scene within was one of chaos. Nagoon, his form radiating a cold blue-black energy, had Ka pinned in a corner with beams of solid shadow. The god's back was to the shelf, his entire being focused on destroying the raven who had dared to invade his home for a second time. Yale did not look. He could not afford to. He scrambled to the shelf. The stars box was there, humming with its contained energy. He placed his claws upon it, pouring all his remaining strength, all his will, into the act of shrinking it. The plain ironwood box resisted, its magic older and more stubborn than the others. He felt a tearing sensation in his mind, but he pushed harder. The box compacted, becoming a small, dense, cold weight in his claw. A shift in the air, a sudden silence. Nagoon had felt it. He turned, his eyes now pools of bottomless black, locking on to Yale. The betrayal this time was beyond rage. It was a cosmic, silent understanding. This was the end. Yale turned to flee, but Nagoon was faster. A wall of solid darkness formed before the entrance, blocking his escape. The god took a step forward, his hand outstretched, not to grab, but to annihilate. In that moment, Ka, straining against the binding shadows, let out a final piercing shriek, a sound not of fear, but of defiant sacrifice. He threw himself forward, his body slamming into Nagoon's leg. It was only a second of distraction, but it was enough. Yale did not head for the blocked entrance. He turned and shot back up towards the smoke hole. He squeezed through, the rough stone tearing feathers from his back. He was out.
He was in the open air. He did not look back for Ka. He knew what he would see. He flew, his heart a stone in his chest, the cold stars box clutched in his claw. He flew south, under the moon, a solitary raven carrying the last of the light, the cost of his triumph etched forever in his soul. He flew until he was over the great central mountain where they had released the moon. He did not land. This final act required a different approach. The stars were not one light, but countless. They could not be placed. They must be scattered. Hovering high in the night sky, at the very apex of the world, he took the cold, dense box in his beak. He put every ounce of his remaining life force, every memory of his journey, every drop of gratitude and grief into one final mighty throw. He hurled the box high, high up, towards the deepest, darkest part of the celestial vault. The box spun end over end, a tiny speck against the infinity of night. Then it exploded. It was a silent, glorious eruption. 1 trillion points of cold, white, and blue fire burst forth, spraying across the black dome of the sky. They were not all the same. Some were large and burned with a steady, brilliant light. Others were small, forming faint, dusty clouds. They arranged themselves in swirls and clusters, in patterns that hinted at great bears, mighty hunters, and flowing rivers. The sky was filled. The void was vanquished. The moon now reigned over a kingdom of diamonds, a tapestry of light so complex and beautiful it stole the breath. The night was no longer a time of fear, but a time of wonder, a canvas for the imagination, a map of infinite stories. Yale, his strength utterly spent, began to fall. He had done it. The cycle was complete. The world had its day, its night, and its dreams. As he tumbled from the sky, the last thing he saw was the fully realized heavens, a legacy of light paid for with feathers, friendship, and an old god's broken heart. The fall and the first dawn. The world spun in a dizzying vortex of silver and black. Yale felt the wind rush past him, not as a medium to be mastered, but as a cold fist pulling him toward the earth. His strength was gone, utterly spent, in the final monumental effort of scattering the stars. The last dregs of his trickster magic had been used to hurl the box, and now there was nothing left to slow his descent. He was a sack of bones and feathers, a falling shadow against the newly brilliant tapestry of the night. He saw the patterns of the stars above him, the great bear, the hunter, the river of light, their configurations imprinting on his fading consciousness. They were beautiful. They were a promise kept. The thought was a small, warm ember in the cold emptiness of his exhaustion. He had done it. He had woven the gray void into a thing of breathtaking complexity. He had given the world not just light, but story. The dark mass of the mountain rushed up to meet him. He closed his eyes, expecting the final shattering impact. It did not come. Instead, he felt a sudden jarring stop. A network of resilient, springy branches caught his falling body, snapping and cracking under his weight, but holding firm. He came to rest cradled in the thick, needled boughs of an ancient, gnarled hemlock that grew from a sheer cliff face on the mountain's side. The impact knocked the last vestiges of awareness from him, and he plunged not into death, but into a deep, profound unconsciousness. His sleep was not empty. It was filled with visions. He sallallahu wasallam nagun, not in his lodge, but standing on a barren plain under the new stars, his head bowed, his power seeping from him like water into sand, his form becoming translucent, merging with the wind and the stone. The age of the hoarding god was ending. He was returning to the silence from which he came. He sallallahu wasallam ka, his brave companion, his form dissolving from the raven shape back into the spirit of the steadfast steersman, a shimmer of light and gratitude that rose from the dark lodge and streamed south towards the human village and the people who would sing his name for generations. He sallallahu wasallam, the world awakening. He sallallahu wasallam, the first true dawn, where the sun's rising was not a shocking assault, but a graceful transition. The stars faded gently, their duty done. Us a band of rose and gold painted the eastern horizon. The sun peeked over the edge of the world, its light now tempered, its warmth now welcome, because the world knew it would not last forever. The day began, and it was perfect because it was finite. He sallallahu wasallam, the human villages at dawn. People emerged from their longhouses, not with shock, but with a quiet, profound joy. They went about their work, mending nets, carving wood, tending fires, but their movements were different. They were filled with a new purpose, a rhythm that mirrored the sky. Children pointed at the lingering morning star and laughed. Elders sat in the sun, their wrinkled faces turned towards its warmth, their eyes closed in simple contentment. He sallallahu wasallam, the forests and rivers. The leaves which had begun to wilt now glistened with morning dew, their green restored. The salmon in the streams swam in water that was cool and clear, their silver flashes like tiny swimming stars. The bears, the wolves, the eagles, all of creation moved to the new celestial clock. There was activity and rest, hunt and harvest, all in a balance that had been impossible in the endless gray or the relentless day. The day began, and it was perfect because it was finite. He sallallahu wasallam, the human villages at dawn. People emerged from their longhouses, not with shock, but with a quiet, profound joy. They went about their work, mending nets, carving wood, tending fires, but their movements were different. They were filled with a new purpose, a rhythm that mirrored the sky. Children pointed at the lingering morning star and laughed. Elders sat in the sun, their wrinkled faces turned towards its warmth, their eyes closed in simple contentment. He sallallahu wasallam, the forests and rivers. The leaves, which had begun to wilt, now glistened with morning dew, their green restored. The salmon in the streams swam in water that was cool and clear, their silver flashes like tiny swimming stars. The bears, the wolves, the eagles, all of creation moved to the new celestial clock. There was activity and rest, hunt and harvest, all in a balance that had been impossible in the endless gray or the relentless day.
He slept for a long time, his body healing, his spirit absorbing the peace of the world he had remade. When he finally awoke, it was to the gentle light of late afternoon. The sun was warm on his feathers, but the air carried the promising coolness of the coming evening. He was stiff and sore, every muscle and bone protesting, but he was alive. He carefully extracted himself from the hemlock's embrace and hopped onto a nearby ledge. He looked out. The world spread below him, vibrant and alive. The colors were no longer harsh, but deep and rich. The shadows were long and soft. The air smelled of sun-warmed pine and damp earth. It was a world complete, a world with a past, a present, and a future. He had done it. The knowledge settled in him not as pride, but as a quiet, humbling fulfillment. The great thief had become the great giver. The trickster had become the creator. He had not made the world from nothing, but he had given it its soul, its time, its rhythm, its beauty. He was just a raven again. The grand magic was spent. The epic journeys were over. He was hungry, he was tired, he was home. With a slow, careful stretch of his wings, he found, to his surprise and immense relief, that his injured wing no longer screamed with pain. It was stiff, but it was whole. The long fall and the long sleep had healed him. He flexed it, testing the familiar strength returning to the muscles. He looked up at the sky, where the first few bold stars were already beginning to appear in the deepening blue, heralding the night. He then looked towards the south, towards the forests of his youth, towards the human villages whose songs he could almost hear on the wind. He had one more journey to make, not a quest, but a return, a flight home. With a powerful push of his legs, he launched himself from the ledge. His wings caught the air, strong and sure. He rose into the sky, a black shape against the sunset, no longer a falling ember, but a master of the winds, flying into the first twilight of a world finally and forever made whole. The return to a changed world. Yale's flight south was not the desperate, lopsided struggle of his previous journeys. It was a pilgrimage of observation, a slow, meandering return through a world reborn. He flew at a leisurely pace, riding the thermals that rose from the sun-warmed earth, his eyes drinking in the details of the transformed land. The changes were not just in the sky, they were etched into the very fabric of life. He flew over meadows. He remembered us monochrome swaths of gray-green, now ablaze with color. Purple lupines stood tall beside clusters of yellow arnica and the white, delicate bells of bunchberry. The air, which had once carried only the scent of damp and decay, was now a complex perfume of blooming flowers, warm pine sap, and the rich, sweet smell of ripening berries. He saw a mother bear with 2 cubs, their coats glossy in the sunlight, teaching them to turn over rocks in a stream to find crayfish. The cubs tumbled and played in a way he had never witnessed before, their movements filled with a joy that seemed directly fueled by the warmth on their backs. He saw a pod of orcas hunting in a channel, their black fins and white patches stark against the brilliant blue of the water, their breaths pluming in the cool air in a rhythm that felt ancient and new all at once. He flew over a human village at the mouth of a great river. The scene was one of vibrant industry. Canoes, painted with the new, brilliant pigments the light had revealed, were being launched. Fishermen cast nets into the water, the mesh glittering like a web of diamonds. Smoke rose from longhouses, carrying the savory scent of roasting fish and the tang of smoked salmon. Most strikingly, he saw art. A massive, newly carved totem pole stood near the water's edge, its figures, raven, bear, wolf, and now the sun and the moon, painted in bold reds, blacks, and blues. The people were not just surviving, they were creating. They were adorning their world, celebrating it. He realized then that his gift was not static, it was a seed. The light had not just illuminated what was already there, it had unlocked a potential that had been dormant for eons. The humans, the animals, the plants, all were responding to the cycle, becoming more than they had been in the stagnant gray. As he flew, he began to notice something else. The other creatures of the forest and sky treated him with a new deference. A family of eagles, circling high on a thermal, parted to let him pass, dipping their wings in a gesture of respect. A wolf, howling from a rocky promontory at the rising moon, paused its song to watch him fly by, its yellow eyes holding not hunger, but a glint of recognition. He was no longer just Yale, the clever raven. He was Yale, the bringer of light. His form was the same, but his presence in the world had been forever altered.
He finally reached the familiar coastline, the rugged, forested edge of the territory he had always called home. He saw the specific bay, the very village where he had first revealed the sun to the village speaker. He circled high above, taking it in. It was the same place, and yet it was entirely new. The longhouses looked sturdier, their roofs repaired, their planks showing fresh carvings. The canoes on the beach were numerous and well-maintained. Gardens of edible plants and medicinal herbs now flourished in cleared areas, their leaves lush and green. And the people, they moved with a confidence and purpose that filled his heart with a deep, quiet satisfaction. He descended, landing silently in the high branches of the great spruce tree that overlooked the village, the very tree where he had been born. It was his old perch, his place of observation. He settled in, tucking his feet beneath him, and simply watched. He saw the village speaker, looking older but standing straighter, speaking with a group of younger men, pointing towards the sea, likely planning a fishing expedition. He saw women weaving baskets, their patterns more intricate than any he remembered, using strands of dyed cedar bark in colors of deep red and rich yellow, colors that had been invisible before. He saw children playing a game that involved chasing their own long dancing shadows, their laughter ringing through the clear air like bells. He was home. But he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he could not simply return to his old life. He was a part of them, and yet he was set apart. He was the catalyst, the one who had changed everything. To hop down among them and squabble for scraps would be wrong. His role had evolved. He was not a god to be worshipped. He was a legend to be remembered. His place was not in the village square, but in the spaces between, in the forest, on the wind, in the stories told around the winter fire. He was a reminder, a guardian of the balance he had created. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in glorious shades of orange and purple, he saw the people of the village stop their work. They gathered on the beach, their faces turned west, and watched the day end. It was a silent, communal ritual. They were not fearing the dark. They were honoring the transition. They were participants in the great cycle. When the moon rose, full and silver, casting a luminous path across the calm water, they did not go inside. They lit fires on the beach, and the sound of drums and singing began to rise into the night. It was a song of gratitude, a story set to rhythm. And in the lyrics, he heard his own name. Yale, the trickster, the thief of light. He had returned to a changed world, and in doing so, he too was changed. His adventure was over. His legacy was just beginning. He closed his eyes. The rhythm of the drums and the salt-scented wind his lullaby, a solitary figure in a high tree, forever a part of the world he had made, and forever watching over it. The weaver of new truths. The seasons turned. Yale witnessed his first autumn, a spectacle that left him breathless. The world, which had exploded into color with the sun's arrival, now performed a final glorious crescendo before its winter rest. The leaves of the deciduous trees, the maples, the alders, transformed into blazing torches of crimson, gold, and amber. The air grew crisp, carrying the rich, sweet smell of decay and the distant smoke of village fires. The sun's angle lowered, casting long, dramatic shadows that spoke of the year's decline. He watched the humans gather the autumn harvest with a feverish intensity, their movements a dance of gratitude and preparation. They harvested the last of the berries, dried vast quantities of salmon, and stored baskets full of edible roots. They were learning the rhythm of scarcity and abundance, a rhythm dictated by the tilting sun and the cooling air. The world was teaching them, and they were proving to be adept students. With the winter came a new kind of beauty. The world grew quiet under a blanket of snow. The familiar landscapes were smoothed into soft white curves, and the green of the cedars and hemlocks stood in stark, beautiful contrast. The sun, low and weak, cast a pale, golden light that made the snow sparkle like a field of crushed diamonds. The nights were long and cold, but the stars were breathtakingly clear and bright, and the moon on the snow created a luminescence that was almost as bright as day. It was during this first long winter that Yale found his new purpose. He saw that the humans, for all their adaptability, still struggled. A hunting party became lost in a sudden blizzard, the uniform whiteness obscuring all landmarks. From his aerial vantage, Yale could see the way. He flew ahead of them, his black form a stark, moving beacon against the endless white, cawing loudly to guide them back to the safety of the forest edge. He did not reveal himself, he simply helped. On another occasion, he sallallahu alayhi wasallam, a pack of wolves stalking a lone hunter who had ventured too far from the village. Yale flew above the wolves, dive-bombing them, cawing and shrieking, creating such a nuisance that the pack broke off their hunt, confused and irritated. The hunter, startled by the commotion, looked up, saw the raven, and hurried home, a story already forming on his lips about the clever bird who had saved him. He became a subtle guardian. He would lead foraging parties to hidden patches of winter berries. He would alert the village to the presence of a stranded whale on the beach, a bounty of meat and blubber. He was the unseen guide, the whisper on the wind, the lucky omen. He also began to see how his story was being woven into the culture of the people. On nights when the northern lights danced in the sky, a new phenomenon of shimmering green and purple that seemed to be the last dying breath of Nagun's power, the elders would tell the full story of the raven cycle. They would tell of the gray age, of the clever, curious bird, of his transformation and his daring thefts. They would tell of the great storm, the help of the animals, the sacrifice of the steersman, and the final, glorious scattering of the stars. But the stories were not static. They grew and changed. In some versions, he had tricked the old man by pretending to be a dancing girl. In others, he had used his own tears to put out the guardian fire. The people were not just remembering history, they were creating mythology. They were using his story to explain their world. Why the raven's feathers are black, scorched by the sun. Why he has a hoarse voice from shouting taunts at Nagan. Why he is both a trickster and a hero. Yale listened to these stories from the shadows, perched on a longhouse roof or a branch outside a lighted window. He did not correct them. He understood that the truth of the event was less important than the truth the story carried. The stories taught lessons about cleverness, about perseverance, about the importance of balance, and about the sacredness of the sun, moon, and stars. He was no longer just a bird who had done a great thing. He was becoming a symbol, an archetype. He was the embodiment of the idea that one being, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, could challenge the established order and change the universe. He was the spark of curiosity that refused to accept a limited world. He had stolen the lights, but in return, the people had given him a meaning that would outlive his physical form. He had woven a new truth for the world, and now the world was weaving him into its eternal story. The trickster had become the tale, and the tale would be told for us long as the rivers ran to the sea and the stars shone in the night sky. The legacy, cast in stone and story. Decades flowed into centuries with the steady, irreversible rhythm Yale had gifted to the world. The raven, sustained by the magic woven into his very being during his great quest, lived on, a silent, ageless witness to the unfolding of his legacy. He saw generations of humans be born, live their lives under his sun and moon, and pass into the memory of their descendants. The village by the sea grew into a thriving town, its influence spreading along the coast. The culture of the people, once defined by a quiet endurance of the gray, blossomed into a rich and complex civilization, its every facet touched by the light. He watched as their art evolved. The simple carvings on house posts and totems became epic narratives in cedar and argillite.
Master carvers, their hands guided by dreams and the stories of the elders, created towering poles that told the entire raven cycle from base to top. There he was, at the bottom, a small, curious bird in the gray mist. Higher up, he was the infant in the lodge, the thief stealing the sun, the leader of the canoes, the climber of the mountain. At the very summit of the pole, he was depicted in his moment of ultimate triumph, wings outstretched, releasing a cascade of stars into the sky. These poles were not mere decoration. They were history books, prayer pillars, and declarations of identity, standing us permanent, soaring testaments to the new world. The people's relationship with the world deepened. They developed a sacred calendar based on the sun's journey. The solstices and equinoxes became times of great ceremony, of thanksgiving for the light's return or prayers for the rains to nourish the summer earth. The moon's phases dictated the timing of harvests, of voyages, of ceremonies. Each constellation was given a name and a story. The Great Bear was a hunter eternally pursuing 7 sisters across the sky. The sweep of the Milky Way was the River of Souls. The sky was no longer a distant ceiling. It was a living, breathing part of their spiritual landscape, a map of their beliefs, all originating from his actions. Yale Salal himself reflected in everything. In the clever, problem-solving nature of the children, who displayed a spark of the trickster's cunning. In the ambitious journeys of explorers, who, like him, set out in canoes to see what lay beyond the known horizon, guided by the stars he had scattered. In the reverence with which a shaman would trace the path of the moon during a healing ritual, calling upon its cool, soothing power. He was a part of them. His story was the foundational myth of their existence. It explained not just how the light came to be, but why things were the way they were. It explained the raven's black feathers, his cleverness, his hoarse cry. It explained the existence of the trickster archetype in the world, the necessary, disruptive force that challenges stagnation and brings about change, for better or worse. He continued his role as a subtle guardian, though his interventions became the stuff of further legend. A lost child, found by a strangely persistent raven leading them home. A village saved from a landslide when every raven for miles suddenly took to the sky in a noisy warning flock. These were not seen as the acts of a single, ancient being, but us the continued favor of the raven spirit, a testament to the enduring bond between the people and the creature who had shaped their destiny. One day, as a particularly brilliant autumn was giving way to winter, Yale felt a strange and profound shift within himself. It was not a weakness, not an illness, but a sense of completion. The magic that had sustained him for so long, the energy of his great deed, had finally done its work. It had been fully absorbed into the world. The balance was entirely self-sustaining now. It no longer needed its original weaver to maintain it. He flew to his favorite perch, the high branch on the ancient spruce overlooking the bay. The air was cold and sharp, and the snow on the distant mountain peaks was blindingly white in the sun. The village below was prosperous and peaceful. He saw a master carver teaching his grandson how to shape the wing of a raven on a new totem pole. He heard a grandmother telling the story of the stolen moon to a circle of wide-eyed children. He saw a fisherman mend his net, his movements syncopated with the rhythm of the lapping waves. A deep, encompassing peace settled over him. His work was done. His story was safe. It was etched into the poles, sung in the songs, woven into the blankets, and whispered in the hearts of the people. It was written in the very turning of the earth and the journey of the stars. He was immortal, not in his body, but in the culture he had fostered. He looked up at the sky, a perfect, clear blue dotted with the faint daytime moon. He had stolen it, fought for it, and now it was simply there. It was the world. It was home. He closed his eyes, tucking his head beneath his wing. He did not fall asleep. Instead, he felt his form begin to dissolve, not into death, but into something else. The black feathers softened, losing their solidity, becoming like smoke. His body lightened, becoming insubstantial. He was not dying. He was transitioning. He was returning to the story. The last thing he felt was not an end, but a beginning, a merging. His consciousness flowed outwards, joining the wind that ruffled the cedar boughs, the sunlight that warmed the carved poles, the moonlight that silvered the pathways on the water. He was immortal, not in his body, but in the culture he had fostered. He looked up at the sky, a perfect, clear blue dotted with the faint daytime moon. He had stolen it, fought for it, and now it was simply there. It was the world. It was home. He closed his eyes, tucking his head beneath his wing. He did not fall asleep. Instead, he felt his form begin to dissolve, not into death, but into something else. The black feathers softened, losing their solidity, becoming like smoke. His body lightened, becoming insubstantial. He was not dying. He was transitioning. He was returning to the story. The last thing he felt was not an end, but a beginning, a merging. His consciousness flowed outwards, joining the wind that ruffled the cedar boughs, the sunlight that warmed the carved poles, the moonlight that silvered the pathways on the water. He became a presence in the laughter of the children hearing his tale for the first time, in the solemnity of the elder recounting it by the fire. The physical raven was gone from the branch, but in the moment he vanished, a sudden, gentle gust of wind swept through the village, stirring the leaves and causing the feathers on the ceremonial headdresses to tremble. The people paused and looked up, feeling a strange, comforting sensation, as if a beloved, watchful presence had just given a final, soft sigh of contentment. Yale was gone, but the raven, the great trickster, the bringer of light, was everywhere. The echo in the eternal cycle. Time, which Yale had set into motion, continued its inexorable flow. Centuries became millennia. The village by the sea saw empires of cedar and trade rise and fall. New peoples came, with different languages and customs, but the land itself remembered. The story of the raven cycle, though sometimes whispered in different words or carved in slightly altered forms, never died. It was us enduring us, the tides, us persistent, us the salmon run. In the modern age, a young girl named Ilara sat on the very same beach, her knees drawn up to her chin. She was a descendant of that first village, though her life was vastly different. She lived in a house with glass windows, she learned from digital screens, she traveled in motorized boats. But her grandmother, a woman with eyes that held the deep patience of the old ones, had made sure she knew the stories. It was a night of unparalleled clarity. A full moon hung over the water, painting a shimmering highway of silver across the dark, placid surface of the bay. The stars, undimmed by the lights of the distant town, blazed with an intensity that felt personal.
The air was cool, carrying the salty breath of the Pacific and the rich, loamy scent of the rainforest at her back. Ilara felt small, but not insignificant. She felt connected. She looked at the moon and didn't just see a rock in space. She saw the quiet sister of the sun, stolen from a greedy god by a clever trickster. She looked at the constellation of the Great Bear and saw not just a random pattern, but a great hunter placed there by a raven's throw. The world around her was not a collection of random geological and biological processes. It was a story with a beginning, a hero, a conflict, and a resolution.
Her grandmother came and sat beside her on the log, her movements slow and graceful. She followed Ilara's gaze to the sky. "He is watching, you know," her grandmother said, her voice soft like the rustling of cedar boughs. "The raven?" Ilara asked. "Yes, not us a bird. You will not see him perched in a tree, but he is here." She pointed to the moon's reflection, dancing on the water. "In the light." She gestured to the forest behind them, where the shadows were deep and mysterious. "In the cleverness of the animals, in the unexpected solution to a hard problem." She placed a hand on her own heart, and then on Ilara's. "And in here, in the part of us that looks at the gray sky and dreams of color. In the part that refuses to accept that this is just the way it is. He is the spirit of change, the bringer of dawn." Ilara understood. The story was not just a tale about the past. It was a living instruction for the present. It taught that one being, no matter how small, could make a difference. It taught that cleverness and courage were more powerful than brute strength. It taught that balance was the most sacred thing in the universe. She looked up at the stars again, and this time she felt it, a presence. It was in the wind that gently lifted her hair. It was in the distant cry of an actual raven, roosting somewhere in the dark woods. It was in the very pulse of the light from the distant suns, a rhythm he had set in motion. The legacy of the raven was not a relic in a museum. It was the sunset that fired the horizon each evening. It was the moon that governed the tides of the ocean and the tides of human emotion. It was the stars that navigators had used for thousands of years to find their way home. It was the fundamental human capacity for wonder. The great thief was gone, but the light remained. The cycle continued. The sun would rise tomorrow because a curious bird had once asked, "What if?" The world was not a place of static gray, but a dynamic, vibrant, and story-soaked masterpiece. And every creature living in it was a beneficiary of that single audacious act of theft. Ilara stood up, the cool sand under her bare feet. She felt the immense weight and the glorious freedom of her inheritance. She was a child of the light, a citizen of a world made whole by a trickster's heart. The story was over, but its echo would resonate for us long as there were eyes to see the stars and hearts to yearn for the dawn. The raven cycle was complete, yet it was also, forever, just beginning.